Chapter 1860. Sumaya. To Gu Zichen, this was a special existence. When Gu Zichen saw the fury in Sumayer's eyes, he felt inexplicably dazed. Her words just so happened to make Gu Zichen's chest tremble despite himself. Thinking back to his words just now, it seemed like he was really being a busybody. Because of their connection to the parallel planes, Gu Zichen felt deeply immersed in everything here, be it the people or the events. It was this sense of immersion that inexplicably made him feel as if he were this era's Yi Zichen. Little did he know that everything was not as he had imagined. To the people of this plane, he was just an outsider. Everyone he was familiar with, everyone who'd cared for him down to the smallest detail, belonged to Yi Zichen now. It did not belong to him. Sorry, I misspoke. Gu Zichen's gaze was apologetic. The longer he stayed in this plane, the more familiar it felt to him. More and more, he forgot that he was supposed to be an outsider. Just now, Sumayer's "this plane doesn't belong to you" had startled Gu Zichen awake. Thinking of his previous behavior, he couldn't help but feel apologetic. It's nothing. I believe that you are very familiar with everything here. You can't help but be immersed in it. I can understand that. Sumayer smiled lightly and said, but even if you are familiar with it, you must always remember that you do not belong to this plane. There are countless parallel planes that belong to you. This is definitely not it. As soon as he finished speaking, Sumayer turned her gaze outside the energy barrier without turning back. The destructive energy produced by its self-destruction would not dissipate in less than 3 minutes. The energy continued to wreak havoc, while Yi Zichen, who had turned into a streak of blue light, continued to rush towards Elder Lin. Saying, in the instant that it self-destructed, Elder Lin's eyes were filled with despair. The saint was dead. The only hope that his Lord had left for him, the Son of God with the blood of his Lord, had self-destructed in front of him. However, this old servant who had served his master for hundreds of millions of years could only watch him self-destruct. He felt that he had failed to live up to his Lord's expectations. A strong sense of guilt lingered in his heart, and it took a long time for him to calm down. He wanted to rush to her side. Even if the raging energy left countless wounds on his body, he still did not retreat. He faced the impact of the energy and advanced forward. Just then, Elder Lin felt his arm being held tightly by someone. Elder Lin, don't go. When he turned around, he saw Yi Zichen, who was enveloped in the light of the Emperor's star. Yi Zichen looked at him worriedly. At the same time, his imperial star formed a defensive barrier in front of him, sheltering it within. Little friend Yi. Elder Lin's eyes flowed with bitterness as he shook his head towards Yi Zichen. This old man understands your good intentions. I can't let you go there again. Yi Zichen stood in front of Elder Lin and said seriously, I don't know what relationship you have with Divine King Joy, but I do know that the dead cannot come back to life. If God King Pleasure self-destructed, no one would be able to save him. If you go on now, you will only throw yourself up. There won't be any other outcome. You should know that self-destruction won't leave anything behind. You don't understand. I naturally wouldn't understand if you didn't tell me, and I probably wouldn't understand even if you did. But so long as I'm here, I absolutely won't let you go. Linru is my good friend. If you die, I won't be able to explain it to her. Yi Zichen stood in front of him, refusing to budge an inch. When you mentioned Linru, Elder Lin's eyes lit up. Lil Ru, you don't want Linru to be sad, do you? In that case, just live well. We, the people you sent on this ship, are all waiting for everything to end. Then, you let us go ashore once more. Elder Lin's eyes flashed with a warm smile. As he looked at Yi Zichen's smiling face, countless thoughts raced through his mind. To tell the truth, he knew full well that pushing Yi Zichen onto this ship was selfish on his part. As for the reason, it was because of a prophecy. The one who could share his master's worries and stand shoulder to shoulder with him would be born in the new era. After much observation, he concluded that Yi Zichen, the Lord of the Emperor's Star, was the most likely candidate. That's why he'd seized the opportunity of the demon invasion to push Yi Zichen onto this ship. In order not to ruin Yi Zichen's growth, he'd pushed everyone he could contact onto this ship. He had his own reasons, but he'd forced his way of thinking onto these people without even asking them what they wanted. They were the victims. He had to take responsibility for them. He had to continue living. No matter how the future turned out, whether he succeeded or perished, he had to stay until the end. However, the Holy Sun was dead. To him, nothing else mattered anymore. To him, the Holy Sun was the most likely candidate. Yi Zichen only had a sliver of chance. Elder Lin, don't go. All of a sudden, a ray of golden light appeared above Yi Zichen and Elder Lin's heads. You're here? I arrived even before the Holy Sun self-destructed, said a low voice from within the golden light. In that case, why didn't I stop him? Laughed the man in the golden light. Why should I? Just because he's the Holy Sun? Elder Lin, don't forget our true reason for staying here. In truth, the Holy Sun is just a possibility. Besides, my chances of becoming the Holy Sun are practically zero. It was close to zero. He no longer had that possibility. His mentality is too twisted. Even if he succeeds and gets sent to our master, he won't be our master's helper. He might even be a hidden danger. It's not that I'm disloyal. It's that you're too foolishly loyal. The man in the golden light sighed. Suddenly, for some reason, Yi Zichen felt as if someone was looking at him from within the golden light. When he looked up, all he saw was pure gold. Lord of the epic star. Yi Zichen knit his brows. Then a voice rang out from within the golden light. In half a month, come find me in the God realm. There are some things you already have the right to know. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to Elder Lin and said, Elder Lin, you're heartbroken by the Holy Sun's death, and so am I. However, his death is only one less possibility. It doesn't mean that all possibilities are gone. At the very least, isn't there a new possibility in front of us? Think it over. If you can think it through in half a month, come see me in half a month. Chapter 1861. The golden light dissipated. No one knew where it had come from, nor where it had gone. When the golden light disappeared, its destructive energy ceased as well. Elder Lin arrived at the spot where it had self-destructed almost instantly, but all he saw was an empty void. Elder Lin's wizened face was filled with sorrow. He stood in a void in a daze, staring blankly ahead with an empty gaze. As someone who could manipulate the laws of heaven and earth, he knew full well that it had truly died. Not even a wisp of its soul remained. He dispersed the starlight around him. Sume and the others hurried to his side as soon as the energy stopped wreaking havoc. Yi Zichen was safe and sound. This was what they wanted to see more than anything else. However, no one said a word because they could sense the sorrow permeating the air. Holy Sun. Elder Lin stood there in a daze, muttering to himself. He couldn't agree with what the man in the golden light had just said. The Holy Sun was indeed a Holy Sun. He was the Lord's only heir, and his blood flowed through his veins. It could be considered as the only hope in their hearts. Elder Lin, who had lived for hundreds of millions of years, had always been full of expectations as he watched him grow, even if he'd lost his way along the way. To Elder Lin, it wasn't impossible for him to change. That was why he was willing to give it a chance. Even before it self-destructed, he was willing to give it a chance to repent. But how had the man in the golden light done it? He clearly had the power to stop it, but he hadn't. He'd allowed the Lord's only descendant to self-destruct in front of them. Then he'd said something that Elder Lin didn't think made sense at all. This was his disloyalty. For an entire hour, Elder Lin just stood there with his back hunched. Is the Holy Sun talking about him? Sume couldn't contain her curiosity and asked through her divine sense. She was truly curious about the relationship between Elder Lin and him. Yi Zichen nodded. So you're saying that this being above the laws is actually working for someone else? Perhaps. In truth, Yi Zichen didn't really understand either. An hour passed, but the man in the golden light's words still echoed in his mind. Even now, he still didn't fully understand what he'd said. Elder Lin was the only one who could explain everything to him. However, in his current state, it was unlikely that he would be able to get an answer to this question. Let's return. For once, Yi Zichen didn't get to the bottom of the matter. He didn't want to burden himself any further. It seemed rather irresponsible, but he already had enough things on his mind. It took him a lot of effort to sort out the ups and downs, and he didn't want other things to add to it. But it's a mess. He would rather pretend that he didn't hear anything and that he didn't know anything. He only needed to ensure the safety of the era and prevent it from being destroyed by the attack of the Outer Realm Protoss. Then, he would safely bring the people who once belonged to the modern world back to the modern world and live an ordinary life. As for the others, if they didn't find him, he would pretend that he didn't know anything. Hearing that, the others nodded. Yi Zichen looked at Elder Lin solemnly before turning around, then nodded towards him as a form of farewell. He didn't care whether Elder Lin saw it or not before turning around to leave. Several streaks of light streaked across the sky, and only then did Elder Lin turn around. Sensing their departure, he sighed softly and then waved his hand to seal the spot where his mother had self-destructed. This was the last place his mother could leave him. He didn't want to return to this place years later, only to find it swallowed up by the Outer Realm's black hole. In the blink of an eye, nearly half a month had passed since the Outer Realm Protoss attack. It could be said that the Outer Realm Protoss attack had ended in failure. The era hadn't been destroyed, but the Outer Realm Protoss had lost 2 divine kings and many elite gods. However, this wasn't Ji Yuan's doing. It was the result of the god race's infighting. At most, Ji Yuan had reaped the spoils of war. Even so, Ji Yuan had suffered a fatal blow. The talisman his mother had given Zhou Wu had resurrected the dead. The resurrected were several times stronger than they'd been when they were alive. Their wanton destruction and slaughter were practically a disaster for the era. Not only that, but the resurrected also had the ability to infect others. It was like the zombies in the modern world's movies. After scratching someone, they could infect them and turn them into the same kind as the resurrected. For a time, the era was plunged into misery and suffering. Fortunately, there was no threat from the outside, so the era's great emperors could throw themselves into the fray without worry. Quite a few experts who'd once lived in seclusion lent a helping hand when the era was in trouble. The situation was still terrible, but it was gradually under control. Chaos City, Alliance headquarters. News of Yi Zichen's transcendence spread like wildfire through Zhuo Mo's official account. It was also because of his transcendence that the Demon Clan and the Divine Clan were truly united. Of course, that didn't mean they were all unified. There were still quite a few unscrupulous cultivators among the Yao and God realms who wanted to take advantage of the chaos to plunder resources that would benefit them. However, they hadn't expected Yi Zichen to transcend. Just as they were about to give up resisting, the Great Alliance voted to reject their request to take them in. As a result, the current era wasn't just purging the zombie-like resurrected cultivators. It was also dealing with the wantonly inciting conspirators. As for Yi Zichen, who transcended, "Wah, I'm really going to break down." A series of miserable shrieks sounded out from behind a mountain of documents. Before long, Yi Zichen shot to his feet. Only now did everyone realize that he'd been sitting in front of the table the entire time. It was just that the pile of documents had completely blocked his view. Currently, the Yao and God realms had sent him battle reports and requests for resources. Yi Zichen didn't go out to suppress the rebellion. Instead, he stayed behind to deal with them. Because to the gods in Yao, Yi Zichen was the only one who could truly do it. Truly fair. I'm done. I want to go out. I'd rather fight those zombies than stay here and look at these shitty things. What the hell is this? A substandard god artifact and 2 bottles of elixirs, and they even need to send me a document? What's even more despicable is that they say they need cotton-padded clothes when the weather is cold. Do they think I'm the head of logistics? The document in his hand was thrown to the ground. Not long after, a beautiful figure appeared beside him and gently picked up the document from the ground. What can we do about it? This is what the Alliance voted for. All resources have been sent to the 10th Divine Mountain. Right now, all of the Yao and God Realm's resources, down to a single piece of paper, are here for us to allocate. If they don't do this, what else can they do? It was none other than Xiao Yumei. She was just as warm and gentle as ever. She knew that Yi Zichen was rather impatient, So she smiled warmly and hooked her finger towards the documents on the table. The documents floated neatly behind her. Since you're tired, take a break. I'll take care of this. Yizichin couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He wanted to take the documents back, but she gently pushed him away. It's fine. Rest well. You haven't slept for half a month because of Ji Yuan. Chapter 1862. This voice didn't come from Xiao Yumei. Yizichin followed the sound and saw Su Mei smiling warmly at him. However, this seemingly gentle smile contained a feeling of gnashing her teeth. At the same time, many gazes fell upon him. Their gazes were all filled with, "Is it me?" Yizichin sensed the murderous gazes and couldn't help but shrink back. At this moment, everyone in the hall stood up from their couches. Zhuo Mo, Pu Jingwan, Xiao Yin, Yin Shang, Go Yuzhan, and the 5 elemental fairies. Every single one of them had a stack of documents similar to Yizichin's. "Isn't it you, mighty Emperor Star? Have you forgotten what the great emperors proposed half a month ago before they left?" Yizichin recalled. If the great emperors have no objection to this vote, then it's decided. The Ocean Emperor looked around. Gathered in front of the hall, which was less than 100 square meters in size, were all existences whose sneeze could shake the entire 3 realms. The 8 divine mountain emperors, the heads of the Yao sacred beasts, the ancient race's 3 half-step transcendence experts. They'd come first to congratulate Yizichin on his transcendence, and second to discuss the problems the various races were facing, as well as the problems they would soon face. There was also the matter of the ambitious schemers who wanted to join the alliance. The vote just now had been for them, and in the end, no one supported their participation. The emperors nodded, then prepared to leave. However, just as they were about to leave, "Everyone, please wait a moment. There's something I'd like to discuss with you all." When the great emperors heard that, they all sat back down. Before Yizichin transcended, he'd held an important position among them. Now that he'd transcended, he could be considered the new era's administrator. The great emperors regarded his suggestions with even greater importance. "Please speak, Master of the Stars." "It's like this. Just now, the head of the White Tiger clan, Wei, mentioned that some Yao clans suffered heavy casualties due to a lack of resources." "That's right." Wei Chun, who had a scar on his eye, nodded. "Such a phenomenon is not rare in the demon race. At least, as far as I know, no less than 30 middle-sized and small-sized groups have been forced to abandon their territory due to the shortage of resources and outdated weapons. Has such a situation happened in the God race?" Reported Emperor Star. "Actually, the God race also has it. This happened on my northern divine mountain." Bitterness flashed through the Ocean Emperor's eyes. Within the God realm, the northern divine mountain suffered the heaviest casualties. On his way to the 10th divine mountain, Zhou Wu passed by the Sea of Innocence. Suddenly, the Ocean Emperor fell silent, and so did the other emperors. They all knew about this. The northern divine mountain bordered the 10th divine mountain. Zhou Wu had wanted to take Yizichin's life, so the northern divine mountain naturally became his last line of defense. At the time, the Sea of Innocence was practically destroyed, and practically none of the Holy Land's experts survived. The Sea of Innocence's holy land was destroyed, and its resources are nowhere to be found. The divine mountains have suffered heavy casualties to begin with. I can't send any resources to the disaster area right now. Then why didn't you tell us? The emperors who were on good terms with the ocean monarch all asked. What do you mean? You're in dire straits as well. Your demand for resources isn't any less than the northern divine mountains. Besides, I'm the emperor of the northern divine mountain, so this is my duty. How could I possibly trouble my dear friends? Said the ocean emperor. What are you saying? Our conditions are poor, but no matter how poor we are, we can still squeeze out some resources for you. I know, right? You're treating us like outsiders. The great emperors discussed the matter. Yizichin took a deep breath, then tapped the table. Great emperors, please wait a moment. In truth, I brought this up because I have an idea. Different clans suffer different kinds of attacks, and there are great disparities in disaster conditions as well. Some clans are in dire straits and lack resources, but for various reasons, they're too embarrassed to ask. Some clans are in dire straits and lack resources. They have enough resources and want to help, but they don't know where to send them. How about this? Let's organize our resources, then send them to a central location. Suddenly, all the great emperors in the hall fell silent. The few great emperors who had been clamoring for resources stopped talking too. Providing resources wasn't a problem, because it was up to them to decide how much to provide. But if they gave away all their resources and sent them to a single person, they'd be placing the entire clan's future on that person's shoulders. Disaster was right in front of them. Everyone should unite and work together to overcome this crisis. But it was impossible to say that they didn't suspect each other. Furthermore, many of the great emperors present had once stood against each other. If not for Yi Zichen's transcendence and the fact that they truly needed to work together, they wouldn't be sitting together. Great emperors, since none of you are saying anything, I'll take the lead. Just as this suggestion was about to fail, Great Emperor Chao Feng of the Society of Saints spoke up. If Star Lord Yi distributes resources, I'm willing to send all of the Divine Mountain's resources to Chaos City. If Star Lord Yi takes over, the Jade Lake is willing as well. The Nine-Tailed Fox clan can also send all their resources to Chaos City and accept a central command. The same goes for the Dragon clan. Do you remember now, my dear Master of the Stars? Sumayer smiled warmly and blinked repeatedly in front of Yi Zichen. Then you called all of us over and had us do your hard labor. Don't tell me you don't remember, my dear Master of the Stars. Ahem. He remembered now. These past few days, he'd been so overwhelmed by the request for resources, he'd forgotten that he'd been the one to propose it. However, it seemed that back then, I think I already sent them their phones. If they needed resources, couldn't they just send it over? Why did they send so many letters? Some of them can use their phones to receive resources, but they feel like learning our pinyin is too troublesome, so they'd rather send us letters. Don't they understand voice input? That's because on the first day, I nearly went deaf from listening to voice input. It was so noisy. Tells Wei Mo to cancel the voice message she sent to the software. Is that so? Yi Zichen didn't dare meet Su Mei's gaze. Instead, he looked at Yin Shang and Go Yuzhan. They both nodded. Yi Zichen instantly smiled sheepishly. Now you're complaining? Don't you feel any shame? These past few days, we've seen far more documents than you, and you've been complaining practically every single day. Could it be that after you transcended, your memory deteriorated, and you forgot everything? Su Mei continued to smile faintly. Zichen really is too tired. Xiao Yumei explained for him. Big sister Yumei, you really don't need to speak up for him. To put it bluntly, he's just lazy. Don't even need to read these documents for him. Just give them to him. You've really spoiled him. If you keep spoiling him like this, he'll only get lazier and lazier. When Xiao Yumei heard this, she only smiled lightly and quietly placed the document on her desk. You spoil him too much. Su Mei was speechless. At that moment, she was filled with regret. It would have been better for her to stay in the Nine-Tailed Fox clan and enjoy her life. She just had to find her sweetheart and then find herself a man who worked day and night. Now that she thought about it, it really was too much of a loss. Yi Zichen's eyes darted around. Aside from Xiao Yumei and Yin Shang, everyone else in the hall, including Go Yuzhan, seemed to have a lot of opinions about him. I have to find a chance to disappear from their sight for a while, so they can settle down again. Bro! At that moment, the great sage walked in with a staff in hand. Chapter 1863. Truly, someone sent him a pillow just when he was about to doze off. The great sage's arrival had come at just the right time. If no one else had come, Sumer would probably have gone on and on for several more hours. The atmosphere in the hall wasn't particularly good. Yi Zichen, as the cause of the problem, felt the need to go into hiding so that everyone could calm down. However, the person who'd come to find him was Elder Lin. Yi Zichen didn't think about what Golden Light had said at all for half a month. In order to truly not think about it, Yi Zichen practically didn't sleep a wink. He was completely immersed in his work on Era Yuan. His arrival had caused half a month's worth of perseverance to go up in smoke. Golden Light's words reverberated through his mind. Take me there. Yi Zichen's tone didn't reveal the joy of escaping. It was heavy. This was because he knew very well that the moment he walked out of this hall, he might face something that would make him even more vexed and powerless. But he still had to face the problem. Since Elder Lin had come, he might as well go take a look. After experiencing so much, his heart was strong enough. The great sage nodded and left. Yi Zichen followed behind him, walking very slowly. Even Sumei didn't accuse him of running away. He'd cunningly avoided everything. She could feel the heaviness of Yi Zichen's footsteps. It didn't seem to be an act. It truly came from the bottom of his heart. He's really working hard. Xiao Yumei sighed as she watched him leave. She's always been so understanding, gentle, and kind. She wouldn't go looking for Yi Zichen's troubles. She was mature enough to understand just how suffocating Yi Zichen's burdens were. Serves him right. He's willing to keep everything to himself and not tell anyone. With that, Sumei angrily sat down in her seat. She hooked her finger at Yi Zichen's documents and took the rest of them. What's the situation outside? On his way to Elder Lin's place, he asked the great sage about the situation outside in order to stop his imagination from running wild. He'd transcended Era Yuan. However, he had been left in the chaotic city from the beginning to the end. He was like an ancient emperor who stayed in the palace all the time. His understanding of the country was completely dependent on the reports of the officials. Yi Zichen was pretty much the same. Sitting in Chaos City, he didn't have a particularly clear understanding of the current era. That's all. The great sage gave an ambiguous answer. Those who have been reborn aren't easy to deal with. Furthermore, their infection is a huge obstacle to their purge. Old Lord Taishang rushed to the scene a few days ago. Through blood samples, he began to develop medicine that could cure the infected. Old Lord Taishang has left the mountain. Yi Zichen smiled in response. His departure from the mountain also meant that he did not continue to refine the pills from before. If the god race's attack from extraterritorial domain came to an end, then the refinement of the pills would naturally come to an end. Then let him develop it. Yi Zichen thought about it, but didn't say anything else. Given the current situation, suppressing the infection was the most important thing. As for the refinement of the pill, he could put it aside for now. Yi Zi, I feel that you have a lot on your mind. Worry flashed through the great sage's eyes as he patted him on the shoulder. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. You've already done very well. If you have any problems, just tell me and Yang Jian. Although we might not be able to help you solve your problems, we can at least listen. It's fine. I've already transcended. What's there to worry about? It's just that I haven't slept in a long time, so I'm a little tired. Yi Zichen smiled, then stopped. I can sense Elder Lin's location. There's no need for you to escort me. I'll head over myself. Zhou had wreaked havoc in Chaos City. Chaos City's once beautiful, picturesque city had been practically destroyed. Although the craftsmen had worked hard to restore some of Chaos City's former glory during the past 2 weeks, there were still signs of destruction. Elder Lin was currently in a temporary workshop that was provided for the craftsmen to rest in. Yi Zichen was rather puzzled by Elder Lin's decision to stay in Chaos City instead of the main palace. Outside, Elder Lin stood in the doorway and looked up at the sky. Elder Lin, a low voice lingered in his ears. Elder Lin came to his senses and saw Yi Zichen slowly approaching. He could tell from Yi Zichen's gaze that he was conflicted. Little did he know, Elder Lin felt the same way. God King Joy's mother's self-destruction had affected him deeply. For the past 2 weeks, he'd been immersed in grief and resentment at the man of golden light for his mother's indifference. However, in the end, he decided to seek out Yi Zichen. It wasn't that he approved of the man of golden light, but rather that he'd only approved of part of it. Perhaps his lord was still doing his best to defend himself. To them, Yi Zichen was indeed a possibility. For his lord's sake, he needed to bring Yi Zichen to that man and help him understand a little about his lord. With a good foundation, he'd be able to ask Yi Zichen to share his lord's worries in the future. As expected, you didn't go. Elder Lin looked at Yi Zichen, then up at the azure sky, and smiled. Half a month had passed, but Yi Zichen was still in Chaos City. That was proof enough that he hadn't gone to the God Realm. Hey, Yi Zichen didn't know what to say, but he grinned. How could he possibly go of his own accord? He was certain that nothing good would come of it. He wasn't the type to go looking for trouble on his own initiative. I was waiting for you, wasn't I? If you hadn't led the way, I wouldn't have known who to look for in the God realm. Besides, those outsiders hate me so much they'd gnash their teeth in hatred. If I went over rashly, wouldn't I be shot full of holes? You brat. Elder Lin had guessed that Yi Zichen wouldn't go of his own accord, which was why he'd come to Chaos City. Now that he'd said it like that, he had a good reason not to go. Let's go. Without saying anything unnecessary, a black vortex appeared on the streets of Chaos City, spinning in a counterclockwise direction. Yi Zichen didn't immediately approach. Instead, he stood there and asked a question that didn't really matter. Do you really have to go? Elder Lin could tell that he was inwardly unwilling to go. He didn't want to cause any more trouble. He already had enough on his shoulders. Do you want to return to the modern realm? Asked Elder Lin. Of course, but I've sealed the modern realm in ice. You can't go back. This simple sentence was enough to determine who was the absolute leader between the two. What Elder Lin wanted to express was simple. If he wanted to return to the modern realm, he needed to undo the seal. Until then, Yi Zichen couldn't refuse him. Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile wryly and shake his head. Being led around by the nose really felt terrible, but there were far too many people waiting to return to the modern realm. Wasn't it just a trip to the God realm? Fine, I'll go. Chapter 1864. In the sky above the God realm, the earth trembled violently. Quite a few gods stared intently at the sky. Before long, they saw a black hole appear in the sky. Elder Lin and Yi Zichen walked out, shoulder to shoulder. When the surrounding gods saw Elder Lin, after a brief moment of shock, they bowed deeply to him to show their respect. Elder Lin, you have quite the status. Elder Lin smiled, but said nothing. Yi Zichen couldn't help but look around. What was going on? The God realm's current situation was similar to the era's. Signs of destruction could be seen everywhere. Quite a few buildings had collapsed, and many of the God realm's gods were wrapped in white bandages. The God realm had been attacked. When they'd first arrived, this place had been just fine. Could it be that someone had attacked their home while they were attacking the era? Serves them right. Yi Zichen took delight in their misfortune. Even though he'd transcended, he still felt both joy and anger. Most of the era's current predicament had been caused by the God realm. They'd wholeheartedly wanted to destroy the era, but in the end, they'd lost 2 God Kings. Now, their home had been invaded. This was too satisfying. Although he hadn't been the one to lead the attack, seeing the God realm's people in such discomfort delighted Yi Zichen, the era's Lord of Stars. Elder Lin didn't seem interested in the God realm's invasion. He didn't even look at them, nor did he pay them any mind. Instead, he dashed toward the tallest building. Yi Zichen followed close behind. Hey, look at that person behind the King of the Laws. One of the gods pointed at Elder Lin and Yi Zichen, who were already a distance away. His eyes flashed with shock. If I remember correctly, that's the 3rd era's Lord of the Stars. Really? Are you sure? I was there when the God King of Destruction's divine sea was sealed. That person really is the era's Lord of the Stars. I heard he's already transcended. What's he doing here? Elder Lin, lead the way. I'm afraid he's here to negotiate terms or make peace. At that moment, a white-haired old man suddenly appeared around the gods. The old man's back was hunched, as if he'd reached the end of his life. When they saw him, the gods trembled in fright and hurriedly retreated. Master Bai. From the expressions of these gods, it could be seen that he had a very high status in the god race. It was just that the god race addressed him as if it was a master god. They would call him a master god. A god king was a god king. This old man didn't have any title. He was just Master Bai. It was also special. Mr. Bai, you just said. The old man hunched his back and looked at the 2 people who were approaching the tallest building in the distance. Even though he looked old, his eyes were not the least bit turbid. Is it that hard to understand? Master Bai shook his head and pointed at the land under the God clan. Our God clan is already in a precarious situation. Outside, there are many God kings eyeing the God clan covetously. Internally, 2 God kings have died, and planet Lord Epic has transcended. I believe that His Majesty Divine Emperor will not treat Ji Yuan with an unyielding attitude. Most likely, he wants to make peace with Ji Yuan's celestial lord. When the extraterritorial deities heard this, it was hard for them to accept it. The extraterritorial deities used to be so glorious. The 10,000 races worshipped him, not daring to fight against him. In recent years, the other planes races had developed rapidly. Only the extraterritorial deities had stagnated. Now, 2 more god kings had fallen, and they even wanted to make peace with Ji Yuan. Don't be too disappointed. This is the general trend. Ji Yuan is different from the other planes. He's too close to us. If they harbor enmity against us, then we really might face our end. The old man looked intently in the direction Elder Lin and Yi Zichen had gone, then sighed. His Majesty Divine Emperor will make a wise decision. Don't let your imaginations run wild. Go do what you need to do. The tall tower soared into the clouds. The pagoda in front of them was even taller than the ancient race's pagoda. From the looks of it, the top was already in the land of primal chaos. The pagoda had a retro feel to it. Even with Yi Zichen's experience, he couldn't tell what material it was made of. Yi Zichen stopped in front of the pagoda and pointed at it. The divine imperial palace, where the god emperor lives, replied Elder Lin, then pushed open the door and entered. The divine imperial palace? In other words, that golden light was the god emperor. In truth, Yi Zichen wasn't all that surprised. He'd already considered this possibility, but he hadn't given it much thought. Now, he was sure that golden light was the god emperor, and he and Elder Lin were both his subordinates. The god emperor and the king of the laws. 2 of the world's peak existences were both his subordinates. This was truly shocking news. It was different from the other god kings' palaces. There were no deities around the divine imperial palace, much less any sort of defense. Elder Lin walked through countless floors of the pagoda, but he didn't see a single deity or other living beings. He's here. When they reached the top, Yi Zichen, who'd followed Elder Lin, saw a man sitting on a platform. The man was tall and muscular, and on the stone table in front of him was a battle axe. Just the sight of it was enough to make one's skin crawl. The top of the pagoda was just as Yi Zichen had expected. The top of the pagoda was shrouded in primal chaos. He couldn't sense any laws or Tao around it. The elements were abundant, but they couldn't be used. The man pointed at the 2 chairs in front of him. Elder Lin walked up and sat down with a cold expression, while Yi Zichen also sat down. "You old man, you still can't get over it," the man said with a smile. "I'm not you. I can't remain indifferent in the face of the Holy Sun's death. Looks like you've been a divine emperor for too long that you've forgotten your identity," Elder Lin angrily rebuked. "You're hurting me." The man shook his head helplessly. "Others can doubt my loyalty to the Lord, but you can't, can you?" "Humph." Old Lin snorted coldly, but didn't comment. There was resentment, and he really couldn't forgive the man in front of him for ignoring the death of the saint. But his loyalty to his master, there was no need to doubt. "You really think too highly of the saint," Yi Futian said. The man sighed again. "After so many years, I've finally figured it out. The Lord left the Holy Sun here only to leave a possibility. If he had really taken a liking to the Holy Sun, he wouldn't have been gone for so long. In the eyes of the Lord, the race, prosperity is far more important than the Holy Sun." Are you trying to say that the Lord is indifferent? No. I feel like the Lord is a true hero. The man's gaze was resolute and unquestionable. He's willing to give up his personal feelings for the sake of the race. I truly admire his righteousness. You can give up on the Holy Sun. He no longer has that possibility. The 2 of them looked at each other. Neither had any intention of backing down. From the moment he sat down, Yi Zichen was completely confused. All of a sudden, he couldn't help but that. "What exactly are you 2 talking about? Don't you think you should explain it to me?" Only then did the man and Elder Lin look towards him. "I nearly forgot." Chapter 1865. Forthright. This was Yi Zichen's first impression of the God Emperor. "It's an honor to meet you." Yi Zichen cupped his hands in greeting, then smiled. "There's no need to introduce me, is there? I'm sure you already know me." "Of course not." The God Emperor waved his hand. His rugged face was accompanied by a thunderous voice. Star-Lord Ji Yuan, I've long since heard of your name. 2 of our foreign god races' god kings died at your hands. It will be difficult for me to not recognize you. Was he intentionally mentioning the 2 god kings? Yi Zichen knit his brows. What was the meaning of this? God King's joy and freedom's deaths had nothing to do with Ji Yuan. He was sure the God Emperor knew this. Your Majesty, this has nothing to do with us. I know. I was just saying. The God Emperor laughed. Star-Lord Yi, don't be so suspicious. Yi Zichen didn't deny it. They were in the God realm, not Yi Zichen's home ground. He'd arrived out of the blue. Who knew what the God Emperor was thinking? If he wanted to use this as an excuse. But then again, if he really wanted to, given his cultivation, Yi Zichen wouldn't be able to resist. Even though he transcended, sitting in front of the God Emperor made him feel like there was an insurmountable chasm between them. This wasn't Yi Zichen looking down on himself. It was the truth. Yi Zichen had transcended, but the God Emperor had been one of the strongest experts in the world since the primordial chaos began. As time passed, his cultivation hadn't stagnated. However, Yi Zichen still couldn't figure out who would be his master. What would the existence above him be like? Could he destroy galaxies in the blink of an eye? Star-Lord Yi, you're absolutely right. At this moment, Shun Guanglong, who was sitting boldly on the chair, laughed. Yi Zichen's expression instantly grew unsightly. He'd spied on his inner thoughts. As if noticing Yi Zichen's frown, the God Emperor couldn't help but feel apologetic. I had no intention of spying on you, Star-Lord Yi, but you still did it. Yi Zichen didn't give the God Emperor any face. Even though his heart could be read, it was only because his realm was not high enough. However, no one would be happy to see this kind of person whose inner thoughts have been peeked out. Even if they could not say much due to the other party's realm, they would not greet him with a smile. Be careful. Little friend, Yi is also considered this old man's friend, Elder Lin said. I really didn't mean it. It just so happened that Star-Lord Yi thought of his excellency, so I couldn't help but say it out loud. Next time, I will definitely pay attention. The god's sovereign laughed. Be careful next time. What was the meaning of this? Next time, be careful not to say what you think. He really was a clever little devil. Yi Zichen's expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. The God Emperor was actually just joking to lighten the mood. In the end, it seemed that his joke wasn't funny at all. Helplessly, he could only put on a serious expression and say solemnly, Star-Lord Yi, do you know why I called you over? He rolled his eyes. When Yi Zichen heard that, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. Wasn't this question **T? If he knew why he'd come here, he wouldn't have come at all. He could have just stayed in the first era. Star-Lord Yi, do you know where this place is? When he saw Yi Zichen remain silent, the God Emperor changed the subject. Was this the God Emperor's bad taste? What was this place? The God race. Although Yi Zichen didn't know what to say, he played along. No! As the God Emperor shook his head, Yi Zichen suddenly sensed something. The main point was coming. Outsiders call this place the God race, but it actually has another name. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes and waited for the God Emperor to continue. Elder Lin couldn't bear to watch any longer. This is the primal ground. Old man, don't steal my words, all right? I should be the one saying that, said the God Emperor in displeasure. You're talking too much. Little friend Yi and I are both very busy. We don't have time to waste on you, snorted Elder Lin. It was a bit too much. In truth, the God Emperor could have just gotten straight to the point. Yi Zichen liked this sort of communication. But if the God Emperor's words were really useful, Yi Zichen was willing to satisfy the old man's desire to keep him in suspense and wait for him to reveal everything bit by bit. Old Lin is right. This is the primal ground. The God Emperor glared at Elder Lin, then repeated himself. However, he didn't just repeat himself. He also explained the primal ground. I presume you definitely don't know what the primal ground is. The primal ground is the region at the beginning of heaven and earth. Your era and many other planes only formed after the primal ground was created, said Elder Lin. Elder Lin ignored the God Emperor. When Yi Zichen heard this, he looked outside the primal chaos. The beginning of heaven and earth. In other words, all the planets in the universe had come into being from here. Star-Lord Yi, you should know about the Milky Way, right? I do. If you ask people from other eras, they probably wouldn't even know what the Milky Way was. But as someone who'd lived in the modern realm before, the Milky Way was all too familiar. Earth was located in the Milky Way. In truth, I've always marveled at Star-Lord Yi's planet as well. It clearly doesn't have much energy for cultivators to live on, but you rely on your own intelligence to travel beyond the planet's surface and discover the vast universe's secrets, said the God Emperor. You know about Earth? Naturally. I've traveled the myriad realms, and I have old friends on Earth, so I've naturally been there as well. When I saw how you lived on Earth, I couldn't help but gasp in amazement, laughed the God Emperor. Then I truly must thank you for sparing Earth's life. Why do you say that, Star-Lord Yi? The God Emperor didn't understand. Given your cultivation, I'm afraid you could destroy Earth with a single sneeze. I'm just thankful that you didn't do anything out of line on Earth, and let me enjoy 20 years of peace. Star-Lord Yi is truly an interesting person, laughed the God Emperor. The Divine Emperor laughed upon hearing this. No matter what I want to do, the old fellow beside you will not give way. He likes Earth very much. Yi Zichen didn't comment on this. Yi Zichen had no way of knowing how Elder Lin felt about Earth. He wasn't interested in finding out. What he cared about was, does any of this have anything to do with what you're going to tell me today? Yes. You can also say it doesn't. The God Emperor laughed inexplicably. I just mentioned Earth in passing, but the Milky Way is the main point. What? Are you trying to say that the Milky Way actually belongs to a certain major power? Yi Zichen seemed to be joking. Back in a modern realm, he'd thought about this sort of thing before. Chapter 1866. The atmosphere was indescribably solemn. When he saw the God Emperor's solemn expression, Yi Zichen didn't dare ask any more questions. He glanced at Elder Lin, only to see him nod. The Milky Way really did have its own rights. At the same time, the solemn God Emperor spoke up. It seems Star-Lord Yi has sensed it. As expected of someone Elder Lin, and I have taken a liking to. You're right, the Milky Way belongs to our master. Don't censor my ass. He just said it casually. Who knew the Milky Way really did have its own rights? He was just a blind cat running into a dead mouse. Sensed it. He didn't have that ability. He wanted to explain, but it seemed the God Emperor didn't want him to either. Fine, I'll admit it. I'll just pretend I sensed it. For Star-Lord Yi to have sensed it, you truly are extraordinary. The God Emperor's eyes brimmed with admiration. Yi Zichen didn't deserve such praise. However, he didn't say anything. He merely rubbed his head and smiled wryly. Your lord is truly a capable man. But of course, when he mentioned his master, the God Emperor couldn't help but reveal a look of reverence. Even Elder Lin's eyes brimmed with reverence. Our master is the master of the Milky Way. Even in the vast universe, he stands at the peak of sin. Society, the master of the Milky Way. Just the sound of it was frightening. Then are you two generals under the master of the Milky Way? Asked Yi Zichen. How is that possible? How can we compare to the generals? The God Emperor shook his head. Elder Lin and I are merely the master of the Milky Way's gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. To put it bluntly, they were just gatekeepers. But judging from the pride in the God Emperor's eyes, being gatekeepers for the master of the Milky Way should be an extremely glorious thing. From this, one could see the master of the Milky Way was indeed a major power. If Elder Lin and the God Emperor were only gatekeepers, then the generals under him were naturally stronger than the two of them, not to mention the master of the Milky Way himself. The master of the Milky Way's glory is limitless. Countless galaxy lords view our master as their leader, and the Milky Way is the largest galaxy. There are many geniuses in the galaxy, and the Milky Way galaxy's position has been consolidated. The Divine Emperor's eyes were filled with emotion as he looked up and recalled the past. Actually, Yi Zichen didn't want to disturb him at a time like that, but he couldn't help but say something. The biggest? Was the Divine Emperor living in a dream? Modern science told Yi Zichen that the Milky Way was one of the many galaxies. Since there was a Lord of the Milky Way, there were naturally other lords of the Milky Way. The biggest. That was the problem. Science in the modern world had found that the Milky Way was not the largest galaxy. The God Emperor was probably living in a dream when he said it was the largest. It was not a problem to worship the master of the galaxy, but he had to speak the truth. Did he really think that he was an idiot who could fool him as he pleased? Is there a problem? The Emperor frowned. Well, as far as I know, the Milky Way, I know what you want to say. The Emperor God waved his hand. You want to say that the Milky Way is not the largest galaxy, right? When the God Emperor said that, Yi Zichen panicked a bit. He couldn't possibly kill them to silence them. Just like the joke in the past. Why did you kill me? Answer, you know too much. Yi Zichen licked his lips when he thought of that possibility. He nodded once again. Fortunately, the God Emperor didn't kill Yi Zichen like the joke. Instead, he confirmed Yi Zichen's words. You're right, the current Milky Way is not the largest. Then, because the current Milky Way was created by my lord. His words were shocking. When the God Emperor said that, Yi Zichen had to admit that he was truly shocked. The Milky Way was created by someone. Created by someone? Something like that? They've searched the modern realm for so long, yet they haven't even figured out 1% of the Milky Way. It was created by someone. Who would believe that? Then, the Milky Way you mentioned. With that, Yi Zichen saw a hint of sadness flash across both Elder Lin and the God Emperor's eyes. It was destroyed. The God Emperor's tone was indescribably solemn. This was probably the most unbelievable thing in his life, and also the most difficult thing to accept. The Milky Way, the largest galaxy in the universe, the Milky Way that his lord presided over, was destroyed just like that. The matriarch died in battle. 10 odd generals died in battle as well. Only his lord was left with a single breath. He used all of his wealth to create a miniature version of the Milky Way and gave it life. What's more, he placed the citizens of the Milky Way, the weak races, into this miniature version of the Milky Way. Until now, there were still people from the original Milky Way galaxy in this galaxy. They had not realized it yet, nor did they know that the Milky Way galaxy they had lived in had long been destroyed in the universe. Then what about the master of the Milky Way? Didn't you say that the master of the Milky Way was the strongest existence in the universe? Didn't the Milky Way produce many geniuses? Why was the Milky Way destroyed? Internal strife, said the God Emperor. The Tsanyue Galaxy, exclaimed Elder Lin. The Tsanyue Galaxy used to be a subsidiary of the Milky Way. The master of the galaxy was the third general under his lord. Back then, the master of the Tsanyue Galaxy told his lord that an unparalleled weapon had appeared in a black hole. His lord did not suspect anything and led his 7 generals to fight for it. However, he fell for Master Tsang Yu's trap. Yeah, the God Emperor sighed. His lord trusted Tsang Yu too much. The black hole didn't have the ultimate treasure Tsang Yu spoke of. There were enemies in the universe that couldn't be calculated with numbers. It was only then that we realized that Tsang Yu had colluded with the people from beyond. Tsang Yu wanted to make a comeback, while our lord was a thorn in the side of the other races. The two sides worked together, causing the 7 generals who followed our lord to die tragically in the black hole. Not even their corpses were left behind. In the galaxy, the God Emperor didn't continue. He didn't want to remember that scene either. Even so, Yi Zichen could still imagine how terrible it was. But since the master of the Milky Way was able to create this galaxy after it was destroyed, it means that he didn't die. Yes, even now, we will die if we don't recognize our Lord. He's too strong. No one in the universe can kill him. He might still be fighting against Tsang Yu and the other races from beyond. He's fighting for the Milky Way, for the people who died in the Milky Way, and for the matriarch. Then, why are you looking for me? Suddenly, Yi Zichen's heart cleared up. He seemed to have guessed why the God Emperor had called him here. Chapter 1867. That's a bit heavy. A long time ago, Yi Zichen was a salted fish with almost no illusions about his future. At most, he would be a brick in his country, moving wherever he was needed. This was the heaviest responsibility he could think of at that time. At most, he would have to shoulder the responsibilities of a father and a husband. But it was that magical day, His disappointment in his relationship pushed him to the lowest point of his life. At the time, he didn't feel like he had anything to lose, but he just had to enter that mysterious chat group. The God of Fortune's red packet was like a ray of light that woke him from his lowest point. After exchanging the money for gold and silver, the first thing he thought of was revenge. To be honest, at the time, all he could think of was revenge. He wanted to make Yao Yu regret everything she'd done in order to release his body and mind. That's what he did. But now that he thought about it with his relatively mature mentality, his actions at that time were somewhat extreme. After that mysterious chat group became the greatest help to his growth. He got to know the great sage, Yang Jian, Third Prince Neza, Marshal Tian Peng, and a series of other immortals that he had only heard of in myths and on television. His life became richer, and his own life blossomed like a flower. Beauties followed, and the future was bright. His happy life was about to begin, but he had no idea that the future was pressing down on him like a demon's hand. The modern realm was frozen. His roommates had died because of him. Guilt was buried deep in his heart. He was chased out of the frozen world. When he went to the immortal, Yao, and demon realms, he could truly breathe the same air as the deities in the chat group. But from then on, he shouldered the responsibility of bringing the people around him back to the modern realm. Li Jiayi's fear of the unfamiliar world and longing for the modern realm. Su Yin and Xia Kik's longing for the modern realm. Xiao Yumei's gentleness subconsciously revealed her longing for the modern realm. All of this weighed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't even straighten his back. He slowly walked forward with a hunched back, each step leaving a heavy footprint in the path of his life. He really was too tired, but he couldn't give up, and he didn't dare to think about giving up. He was afraid he'd never be able to lift his tense nerves again. He could only continue to work hard for the future and for the future of their smiling faces. The immortal demon race had been annihilated. He, who had long since become an immortal king, ascended to the god race. Yes, god race. He still hadn't returned to the modern world, but an even heavier burden had found him. He was the Era Star Lord. Soon, the era would come to an end. As the Emperor Star's Lord, he had to bear this responsibility and allow the era to transcend. It was really tough. When Yi Zichen was alone in the middle of the night, he would always look up at the starry sky as the memories of the modern realm echoed through his mind. This was probably the only thing that had supported him all this way. He believed that everything he had done was to prepare for his return to the modern world. When he truly transcended and the era was safe, he could bring his women and brothers back to the modern world, living the most ordinary life. He was wrong again. When he truly transcended, he was welcomed by the divine emperor and learned of a possibility that he had never imagined. The Milky Way, defend the galaxy, avenge the galaxy. If it were anyone else, they would definitely feel their blood boil with passion. They would say some impassioned words and place their lives in the hands of the divine emperor and the others. Yi Zichen didn't want that. His refusal came from the bottom of his heart. He didn't want his life to be filled with all sorts of troubles. His original intention was to be an ordinary person. Why did he have to become like this? It was as if he had become the savior of the world. Sorry, but he didn't feel like he was that great. Besides, he didn't want everyone who cared about him to worry about him anymore. Xiao Yumei, Su Yin, Kik, who hadn't been filled with anxiety when he was in danger. He didn't want the people important to him to ever show such fearful expressions again. He could do anything for the sake of the world, but all of that was within his power. As for protecting the Milky Way and avenging it, that was too much for him. He felt like it wasn't something he could do. Yi Zichen let out a deep sigh. A hint of apology flashed through his eyes. Then he crossed his arms and smiled at the divine emperor. Sorry, please allow me to refuse. The moment he said that, both Elder Lin and the divine emperor's eyes flashed with shock. Yi Zichen was the only possibility they could see in the Milky Way. In their eyes, everyone else was nothing more than ordinary people. They were amazing, but they couldn't grow out of the shackles their Lord had laid down for them. Yi Zichen's refusal wasn't just a rejection of their request. It also destroyed all of their hopes. He pushed them, who were already on the verge of death, over the edge. Their lord needed help. His future would be too lonely if he struggled to hold on by himself. Little friend ye, Elder Lin frowned, then said sincerely, their lord needs your help. The Lord needs your help. The Milky Way galaxy is our common home. Your close friends and family all live in the Milky Way. It can be said that protecting the Milky Way is protecting your family, and avenging the Milky Way is also fighting for resources for their future. If you accept us now, then we'll give you time to grow. When the Milky Way is rebuilt, you will be the greatest person in the Milky Way besides their Lord. Everyone around you will enjoy the Milky Way's gifts. Sorry, Yi Zichen remained unmoved. Anger flashed through Elder Lin's eyes, as if he was angry at the person he'd chosen to ignore the bigger picture. Do you not want to return to the modern realm? A threat. Elder Lin knew that this sort of behavior was terrible and might even backfire on him. However, he had to do this for his lord's safety and the future of the Milky Way. He hoped that Yi Zichen would still have some lingering feelings for the modern realm. This caused him to hesitate, unable to refuse clearly. He was wrong. However, the moment Elder Lin said that, Yi Zichen's hands trembled violently. Then he looked at Elder Lin in disbelief. That person had always been highly respected in Yi Zichen's heart. Even though he'd used some tricks to push Yi Zichen into this sort of trouble, he was still kind. Yi Zichen was very suspicious of why Elder Lin would say something like that. Chapter 1868. Instantly, Elder Lin slammed the table. The surrounding primal chaos changed slightly, and an invisible cage locked the three of them inside. In this primal chaos world where there was no elemental energy, Elder Lin was still able to control the power of the loss. But what did he mean by doing this? Force him to submit? The mockery in his eyes intensified. It seemed like he had misjudged Elder Lin in the past. He had thought that he was a highly respected elder, but it seemed that there was nothing special about him. Elder Lin, are you trying to trap me here? As soon as these words were spoken, Elder Lin was put on spot. In truth, he was doing this purely because he didn't want Yi Zichen to leave. The way he saw it, Yi Zichen's refusal was acceptable, but it wasn't as if there was no room for negotiation. He wanted to keep him here and listen to his conversation with the Divine Emperor. Perhaps a turning point would come. But now, regardless of whether it was Yi Zichen's expression or his words, or even his actions, all of them put him in a difficult position. There was no way out. Elder Lin, I came with you because I trust you. I've always felt that you're a benevolent elder, and I believe that you can understand why I refuse. But you threatened me with the present world, and now you've trapped me here, not letting me leave. I'm really disappointed. I'm not disappointed in you, but in myself. I'm disappointed that I didn't see people deeply enough and made friends with the wrong people, which caused me to fall into this whirlpool. Yi Zichen looked straight at Elder Lin. There was nothing for him to avoid. Right now, he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't afraid of looking into anyone's eyes. You're threatening me with the modern world? Fine, I'll be frank with you here. I really care about the modern world, not just for me or my loved ones. We all want to return to the modern world to live. We're really tired of the disputes here. I've always been working hard to return to the modern realm, but if you're using this to threaten me, then I can only say that you're overthinking things. This is not enough to be used as a bargaining chip to threaten me. Why don't you use this kind of threat to trap me here and force me to submit like you're doing now? Answer. Hesitation flashed in Elder Lin's eyes. Actually, his thoughts weren't that bad. However, his behavior really wasn't very honorable. Yi Zichen's words left him with no way of retorting. Then what do you want now, Lord God Emperor and Monarch of the Laws? Do you want to use force to force me to sign an unfair treaty with you? I'm a person who won't give up until I hit the southern wall, and I won't shed a tear until I see the coffin. Even if it's the two of you, I'm willing to give it a try. Starlight surged. There was no way to mix the elements here, so the elemental spirits of the 5 elements naturally did not have their unique effects. Starlight was a technique that utilized the power of the stars. As long as there was starlight, as an Emperor star, he would be able to use the power of the stars there. Azure blue starlight enveloped him, and a Xianyuan sword slowly appeared on his arm. The golden light and the blue starlight blended together, making the divine palace exceptionally dazzling at best. It was obvious. Yi Zichen's actions told Elder Lin and the others that if they wanted him to submit, they'd have to beat him into submission. As for how to make him yield, that was up to him. Elder Lin and the God Emperor looked at each other, but neither showed any signs of wanting to fight. This wasn't the result they wanted. They'd brought Yi Zichen here to discuss things, not to fight him. There was no room for negotiation with Elder Lin. From the moment he sealed this place, he couldn't come down. If he removed the seal, it would seem like he was afraid of Yi Zichen. If he didn't remove the seal, it would seem like he really wanted to force Yi Zichen into submission. All he could do now was sit. The God Emperor knew this, so he laughed heartily. Star-Lord Yi, Star-Lord Yi. The God Emperor laughed heartily and clapped his hands. He stepped forward, approached Yi Zichen, and tried to pat him on the shoulder. He'd long since learned from the Ocean Emperor that a God King could instantly seal their spiritual seas. The God Emperor was naturally even more powerful than a God King. No one knew whether or not he was trying to seal Yi Zichen, so before he could reach out, Yi Zichen took a few steps back. The God Emperor had wanted to ease the tension, but his hand hung awkwardly in midair. He looked at his hand, laughed self-deprecatingly, then took a few steps back. Star-Lord Yi, you're being far too careful. How could I not be careful? With the God Emperor and the King of Laws working together, who would dare say they weren't on full alert? If I'm even the slightest bit careless, I'm afraid I'll fall into your trap, snorted Yi Zichen. Star-Lord Yi, you really don't need to be so wary of us. We invited you here out of sheer sincerity, the Divine Emperor said with a wry smile. We have no ill intentions. Just now, Old Lin really was a bit impulsive. That's why he said those words and acted so viciously. It's not that he's a bad person, but Star-Lord Yi, you should know that Old Lin isn't that sort of person. Yi Zichen didn't deny this. He'd always had a good impression of Elder Lin. He'd only followed him to the God Realm because of his trust in him. Unfortunately, after arriving here, Elder Lin had taught him a vivid lesson. He's just too loyal. The God Emperor shook his head and sighed bitterly. It's not just him. If I were in his shoes, I might do the same. It's for no other reason than the fact that you're far too important to us. Yi Zichen said nothing. I know that you don't care about the Lord's importance, but you're not like us. You can't empathize with him. We don't have the right to impose our opinions on you. We can't throw all our hopes to you just because of our incompetence and let you carry our dreams with you. We can't let you carry our dreams and do what we want. That's very selfish. I apologize. As he spoke, the God Emperor really did bow deeply to Yi Zichen. Truly, we're very sorry for our actions just now. We were too desperate and forced a grudge against you. In truth, I didn't mean for you to agree right now. What? Asked Yi Zichen. Right now, you're still too weak. Even Old Lin and I can't help the Lord. You can imagine what he's facing. If you go now, you'll just be throwing your life away. That's why you're just a possibility in our hearts, said the God Emperor. We'll do everything in our power to raise you so that you can grow to the point where you can help the Lord. This might take decades or centuries or millennia or even tens of thousands of years. Chapter 1869. It was all for a single possibility. The divine emperors of countless realms tried to persuade him in a pleading tone, as if their lips were about to break. As for Elder Lin, due to his past actions, he couldn't participate. However, from the look in his eyes, it was clear what kind of expectations he had for Yi Zichen. Logically speaking, the God Emperor and the others had already given him enough face. In truth, Yi Zichen didn't really want to antagonize them to the point where they'd clash head-on. Putting aside whether he had complete confidence in himself or whether he could really escape from the hands of the Divine Emperor and Elder Lin, he did not know whether he would be able to do so. He had billions of lives behind him. There were also countless relatives and close friends who were anxiously waiting for his return. Gradually, Yi Zichen's starlight dissolved into motes of starlight and returned to the primal chaos. His hostility gradually returned to his body. When the God Emperor and Elder Lin saw this, they were overjoyed. That was right. Neither the God Emperor nor Elder Lin wanted to fight Yi Zichen to the point of no return. Perhaps it was because they'd been too anxious earlier that they'd ended up in such dire straits. But if things could be repaired now, that would be for the best. Star-Lord Yi, if that's the case, what do you think? The decision is up to me, right? Said Yi Zichen. Of course. The God Emperor nodded. Once you've grown strong enough to assist our Lord, even if Elder Lin and I wanted to force you to go, we'd have to be strong enough to do so. By then, even if we joined forces, we wouldn't be able to deal with you. The right to decide is naturally in your hands. Then, the God Emperor and Elder Lin's eyes brimmed with anticipation. These few short seconds were the longest torture they'd ever experienced in their lives. In their hearts, they hoped that Yi Zichen would nod. To tell the truth, they really didn't have the guts to trap him here and prevent him from returning. There was no need to even mention directly attacking him. At the end of the day, he was the only possibility. If they destroyed him, they'd lose all hope. The Milky Way galaxy, or rather, their lord, would truly have no hope. Yi Zichen hadn't done this on purpose. He didn't have the bad taste to use his hesitation to stir up the God Emperor and Elder Lin's emotions. His hesitation was completely based on the fact that he really couldn't make a decision. At this moment, he was also struggling in his sea of consciousness. If he gave up, he would naturally be relaxed. However, the Divine Emperor and Elder Lin had already spoken to this extent. If he refused, it would be too hurtful to them. In the long run, even the Milky Way with the Master of the Galaxy could be destroyed. Wouldn't the Milky Way, which was hastily created by the Master of the Galaxy, be discovered by the enemy? He believed that if the Sanyue galaxy that the Divine Emperor mentioned knew that there was still a fire seed left in the destroyed Milky Way galaxy, he would definitely kill this potential threat at all costs. At that time, when the alien life forms from outside the galaxy came to this era, how could they survive? Agreeing to it might seem like the best decision right now, but the burden on his shoulders would become even heavier. He would think about these things all the time, and the burden on his heart. Yi Zichen really did not dare to think about it. Forget it. There had to be a few people who lived for others so that more people could live for themselves. If everyone selfishly thought about themselves, the world would become a mess. All right, I agree. No one could understand how heavy Yi Zichen's heart was when he said those words. He agreed. His agreement meant that the heavy burden of the Milky Way galaxy's future was now resting on his not-so-broad shoulders. His shoulders, which were already very heavy to begin with, felt as if a 10,000-ton boulder had ruthlessly pressed down on him the moment he finished speaking, causing his legs to involuntarily bend a little. But he still had to continue moving forward, even if every step he took was difficult. He could only continue forward. That's great. The Divine Emperor and Elder Lin's eyes lit up with undisguisable joy. So long as Yi Zichen agreed, they could finally put down their worries. As for whether or not Yi Zichen would go back on his word, they weren't worried at all. Elder Lin had been paying close attention to Yi Zichen ever since he left the modern realm. Elder Lin had long since figured out what kind of person Yi Zichen was. Since Yi Zichen agreed now, he would naturally step up when the time came. Star-Lord Yi, I express my gratitude to you on behalf of the entire Milky Way galaxy. The Divine Emperor reached out and grabbed Yi Zichen's hand, then shook it repeatedly. It was as if some philanthropist in the modern realm had donated money, and a leader had stepped forward to express his gratitude. In response, Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile sheepishly, or rather, bitterly. At that moment, Elder Lin released his spatial seal. He stood to the side as if he wanted to say something, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get the words out. Elder Lin, it's all in the past now. Yi Zichen smiled at Elder Lin. Elder Lin's murky eyes trembled slightly as he nodded. Ha! Star-Lord, he truly has a heart as broad as the sea. As expected of someone the world has placed such high hopes on. Only someone with this kind of breadth of mind can let go of the world. The Divine Emperor rummaged through his library of compliments, then continued to shower Yi Zichen with praise. Right, Star-Lord Yi. Actually, I have a gift for you this time. A gift? The Divine Palace of Destruction. Yale had broken the rules and had his divine sea sealed. Now that his divine sea was sealed, he could no longer enjoy his former glory. The divine emperor had even placed him under house arrest, so he could only move about within the boundaries of the divine palace. He couldn't go to the new era, so he could only send his subordinates there on his behalf. However, having his divine sea sealed didn't affect his status in the hearts of the gods. Everyone knew that the seal was only temporary. Once it was removed, he would still be the God King of destruction. It seems my luck is quite good. If I had gone with you, I fear I would have died outside the new era. Yale sat upon the throne of the divine palace of destruction. Beneath him were the 11 overgods. The overgods had reported everything that had happened, but they'd learned of freedom and Joy's death from the god race's intelligence agents. This was because when they returned to the god realm, Stark and Joy had yet to die. Your Majesty, you're exaggerating. If you hadn't had your divine sea sealed, the new era would have been destroyed long ago, said one of the overgods fawningly. That's true, but I really did have my divine sea sealed. As soon as he finished, Yale looked at the goddess of war with a smile on his face. His eyes were filled with gentleness. You were lucky to have listened to the war goddess. If you had stayed behind, you would have been caught up in the explosion as well. You should thank her for making the most rational decision at the most critical moment. It's no problem. I merely did what I had to do. Chapter 1870. Her smile faded. The moment he saw war goddess expression, Yale felt that the problem might be serious, and it might even affect him. Even though she didn't say anything, this feeling grew stronger. Speak. Yale raised his hand. War goddess spoke. Just now, someone reported that Aristar Lord came to the outer realm. The faces of the sovereigns in the hall all turned solemn. Aristar Lord came to the outer realm at this time. One had to know that the outer realm celestial race and Ji Yuan were irreconcilable enemies. The witch race had attacked the outer realm celestial race, causing them to suffer heavy losses. 2 god kings had gone to Ji Yuan and self-destructed, humiliating the outer realm celestial race. Only by destroying them could they erase this humiliation. This humiliation. Was he here to provoke the outer realm celestial race? Where is he? Yale's eyes narrowed. He came with the king of the laws, heading towards the divine palace. War goddess squinted her eyes, her gaze solemn. My guess is, say no more. Yale snorted. He had already guessed what war goddess wanted to say. Peace. That was definitely not going to happen. As long as he, Yale, was here, he would never let the outer realm celestial race make peace with Ji Yuan, God King of destruction. At this moment, a white shadow suddenly appeared in the shrine of destruction. The divine emperor has ordered for the God King of destruction to lead the northern gods to the divine palace. The divine emperor has something to announce. The white shadow came abruptly and left abruptly. The sharp voice was still echoing in the divine palace, but the shadow had already disappeared from the divine palace. The sovereigns in the hall all stared at Yale, who currently had a savage look on his face. It seems like it is as I guessed. The divine emperor really intends to. The goddess of war, who had always been good at reading people's words and body language, was now purposely bringing up what she was about to say, as if she didn't have the slightest bit of insight. The ferocity in Yale's eyes intensified. Even though he had no god power, his body still emitted a heavy pressure. The sovereigns all secretly gulped. Yale, however, took a deep breath. He didn't believe it. 2 god kings died in Ji Yuan, and the outer realm celestial race was destroyed. The divine emperor could negotiate with Ji Yuan, but he didn't believe that the gods of the extraterritorial divine race would agree to it as well. Sometimes, the power of public opinion was much greater than one's realm. He did not believe that the god emperor could resist the power of the god race's public opinion and force a truce with Ji Yuan. Take them to the divine palace. I would like to see what the divine emperor has to say. In front of the divine palace. When Yale's northern god clan's majestic army arrived at the divine palace, the people from the other 3 god clans had already taken their positions. Among them, emotional god kings stood at the very front. That was the position closest to the divine palace, and also a position no god king could stand at. Unfortunately, The Pleasure God King and the Freedom God King had self-destructed, so the Southwest and Southwest God clans could only be led by the chief god. This was especially true for the God Palace of Liberty, which only sent the most ordinary god soldiers. The elite soldiers had already perished outside the epic. Yale, Orbis. When the only two god kings of the god race met, because they didn't have a deep personal relationship, they only nodded at each other and stood in their respective positions. As for the northern god clan's army, they were commanded by the war goddess, and they stood to the north of the divine palace. Golden light illuminated the world. Countless gods silently awaited the divine emperor's arrival. Just as the golden light appeared, instantly, the gods of the four god clans bowed their heads. We greet the divine emperor. Their voices fill the air. When the gods looked at the golden light, their gazes were filled with reverence. As they bowed, the god lord knelt on one knee, while the emotional god king and god king of destruction bowed slightly as well. The golden light in the sky slowly dissipated. The divine emperor stood proudly in the sky like a heavenly deity, with Elder Lin and Yi Zichen by his side. At ease, a low, distant voice echoed through the surroundings. When the outsiders heard this, they rose to their feet. "Thank you, divine emperor." When they looked up, they saw Elder Lin and Yi Zichen standing by the divine emperor's side. None of them were unfamiliar with Elder Lin. He was the king of the laws, and he'd frequently visited the outside god race. Apparently, he was on good terms with the divine emperor. As for the person beside him, Yi Zichen, Yale's pupils constricted. Quite a few of the northern god race's gods recognized him as well. Could it be that the divine emperor really wanted to face the wrath of countless gods and announce this matter? "I brought you here because I have something to announce to you." The divine emperor got straight to the point and pointed at Yi Zichen. "Before that, let me introduce you to Yi Zichen, the lord of the first era, as well as a transcendent of the third era." Whoosh! The gods were in an uproar. The lord of the first era had come to the outside's territory. What was he doing here? Was he flaunting his era's power? Two god kings had died for the first era. Was he here to humiliate the god race? Quite a few gods revealed fury in their eyes as they announced Yi Zichen's identity. Among them, the divine palace of Liberty was the most resentful. Perhaps the divine emperor was deliberately hiding it, but he wanted to leave them with a final good impression. The god race didn't know they were responsible for Stark's death. Right now, the god race still believed Yi Zichen was responsible for their and Stark's deaths. The divine palace of Liberty didn't know the truth. To them, Yi Zichen was naturally their enemy. He was the one who killed their god king and destroyed their freedom paradise. As for the divine palace of Pleasure, their reputation among the outsiders wasn't good to begin with, so they didn't really care about God King Pleasure's death. "It seems they're all quite angry with me." Yi Zichen smiled wryly, but in the god's eyes, his wry smile seemed to be mocking them. For a moment, the crowd was in an uproar. "Not bad." Yale nodded in satisfaction. This was exactly the scene he'd wanted to see. The entire god race was filled with disgust for Yi Zichen. There was no way to contain this sort of seething anger. He refused to believe the divine emperor would dare. "All of you shut up." Suddenly, the divine emperor's eyes narrowed and he roared. His angry roar was mixed with the might of an emperor, and when the gods heard it, it shook their hearts. For a moment, the entire divine palace fell silent. Star-Lord Yi is an honored guest. What a disgrace. The gods didn't say anything. Part of the reason they'd shouted just now was because the divine emperor's might was suppressing them, preventing them from expressing their emotions. Chapter 1871. The gods were in an uproar. Even God King of Destruction Yale was dumbfounded. The God Emperor's words reverberated in his mind. Alliance. This wasn't just a simple peace negotiation. He wanted to form an alliance with Ji Yuan. If it was just a simple peace negotiation, there might be a chance that the peace treaty would be nullified in the future. Or perhaps when the time came for peace talks, the outside god realm could once again wield their sharp blades against Ji Yuan. A similar situation had occurred in other planes before, but now they were forming an alliance. The gods couldn't understand the god emperor's declaration. Ji Yuan had killed two of their god king's mortal enemies. The god king's corpses hadn't even grown cold, and now the god emperor wanted to form an alliance with Ji Yuan? How could they not be disappointed? Especially those from the divine palace of freedom. When they heard this, they couldn't restrain their anger. Unfortunately, the one standing above them was the god emperor, the supreme ruler of the outside god realm. His right to speak had absolute authority in the outer realm god race. No one could interfere with his thoughts. No matter how unwilling they were, all they could do was grit their teeth. Was it over just like that? Were they really going to let Ji Yuan form an alliance with the outside god realm? Were they really going to have no choice but to bury their hatred deep in their hearts? They needed someone to step forward and vent their dissatisfaction. Why? At that moment, someone really did step forward. This person was from the divine palace of freedom. He was a former overgod under Stark's command. His face was flushed red, and his brown eyes brimmed with hatred for Yi Zichen. Due to the suddenness of his voice, everyone looked in his direction. This overgod met everyone's gazes and the god emperor's oppressive gaze. He walked to the front of the crowd and looked up at the god emperor. Why should we form an alliance with Ji Yuan? I don't understand. Someone dare challenge the god emperor's authority at a time like this? Yi Zichen couldn't help but arch his brows. He admired this expert's boldness. There were so many gods, including the god kings, and he was sure that most of them held a grudge against Ji Yuan. Yet not a single one of them stepped forward. Even the god kings obediently obeyed the god emperor's orders. Only this person, judging from his aura, was an overgod. He dared question the god emperor like this. How much did he hate Yi Zichen for him to be so daring? Do you have any objections to my decision? The divine emperor said expressionlessly after looking at him for a while. Yes, I have an objection. All the gods present could sense that the god emperor was getting a little angry. No one dared to get on his bad side at this time. However, the overgod seemed to have reached a boiling point. He completely ignored the god emperor's expression and the changes in the surroundings. He just stood there with his back straight. The divine emperor was staring at the divine emperor with eyes full of anger. Is this guy crazy? That's right. The divine emperor's expression has already darkened, yet he still wants an explanation. He seems to be from the Freedom God Palace. The death of the Freedom God King must have affected him greatly. I heard that many of the lords of Liberty God Palace were handpicked by the Liberty God King. They have deep feelings for the Liberty God King. But even so, he can't treat the God Emperor like this. Isn't he afraid of death? The surrounding gods discussed stealthily. They didn't like war to begin with, and the deaths of the Freedom God King and Pleasure God King didn't affect them at all. As a result, they were still rational. They were shocked by the Overgod's words and secretly broke into a cold sweat on his behalf. Wonderful. Yale, the God King of Destruction, laughed inwardly. Finally, someone had stepped forward to object. This person definitely wasn't the only one. He was certain that his appearance would incite even more people to voice their objections. God Emperor, what are you going to do now? However, before a sneer could appear on Yale's face, the divine emperor in the sky gave him an answer without hesitation. You're not allowed to object. All you have to do is carry out my orders. The surrounding gods were dumbfounded. This was such a decisive answer. There was no room for doubt. They had to carry out his orders. In truth, such domineering words didn't sit well with the god realm. As soon as the words came out, a large number of gods started to clamor. They couldn't hear the specific content, but most of them were objecting to the god emperor's arbitrary actions. Do you want to rebel? A thunderous voice boomed. Little did they know that this deterrence didn't have the same effect as before. The clamor among the gods grew louder and louder. The sovereign was panting raggedly as he pointed at the divine palace of liberty behind him. God Emperor, why should we listen to you? To put it bluntly, under your rule, the outer realm god race's national strength has become weaker and weaker. When the Darkness God King was still around, who in the billions of planes dared not bow down to the outer realm god race? But now, more and more planes are coveting the god race. That's nothing. As god race warriors, we're not afraid of any provocation. For our homeland, we're willing to shed our blood for our race. But now, you're telling us to form an alliance with the Aragod race. The tiny Aragod race, who exists like an ant, has now become the target of our fear. Out of fear, we want to form an alliance with him. Your Majesty, do you know that the Freedom God King and Joy God King have yet to die? Ji Yuan is the Outer Realm God race's greatest enemy. You're willing to form an alliance with him at all costs. But have you ever asked us, the billions of warriors who have served the God race with our lives? You're arbitrary, but I'm telling you right now, we're not willing. Even if we die, we won't form an alliance with an enemy, nor will we express goodwill to an ant. The Overgod's words reverberated outside the divine palace. Due to his orders, a large number of God race warriors waved their weapons and shouted, "We will not form an alliance." It seemed like things had gotten out of hand. Yi Zichen subconsciously glanced at Elder Lin. To tell the truth, he really didn't understand how Ji Yuan had provoked the Outer Realm God race. After all, Ji Yuan was the real victim. Even if the Outer Realm God race had lost 2 God Kings, it was their own fault. Don't worry, he'll take care of it. Elder Lin's tone was very soft. When he looked towards the God Emperor, he saw that the God Emperor was still staring expressionlessly at the Overgod and the other gods. It seems like you've suffered quite a bit. The God Emperor smiled silently, then reached out with his right hand. Chapter 1872. The veins on the God Emperor's arms bulged, and the veins on the God King's face popped out. The God Emperor really didn't hold back. This sudden scene stunned many gods. Even God King of Destruction, Yale, stared blankly for a long time. Understood. No wonder these gods were so emotional. Logically speaking, the gods of the Outer Realm were shrouded in the shadow of the God Emperor all year round. Fear should come from the bottom of their hearts. Even if the God Emperor's actions displeased them, they were still intimidated by him all year round. They didn't dare to vent their anger. The God Emperor, just now, seemed to have stepped forward out of anger. But when it came to his subsequent words, he had already lost all rationality and was completely blinded by anger. As a God Emperor, he should treasure his hard-earned status and realm. He should know when to advance and when to retreat, and what was most beneficial to him. His actions and words had already puzzled Yale. Now that the God Emperor had captured emotional God King Orbis, everything became clear. The emotional God King was manipulating the emotions of the surrounding gods, using them to interfere with the announcement of the alliance. Are you done playing? The God Emperor grabbed the emotional God King. His eyes were filled with a piercing cold light as he narrowed his eyes into a thin line. From the moment the God Emperor appeared to question him, he already knew everything. He didn't point out directly because he saw that the emotional God King had been working hard for the God race for so long. He didn't want to be so thick-skinned and wanted to talk with him after everything was over. Alas, the emotional God King was becoming more and more excessive, magnifying the emotions of more than half of the gods. If he let him continue, would the God Emperor really have to act against these gods? Since that was the case, he could only end everything from the source. God Emperor. The emotional God King's expression was pained, and his eyes were filled with panic. From the God Emperor's eyes, he could see that the God Emperor really wanted to kill him. He never imagined this would happen. Manipulating the emotions of the other gods was indeed his doing. After all, among the previous God Kings, he was actually the most neutral. He had no ill intentions towards Ji Yuan, nor did he want to participate in this conflict. Unfortunately, the appearance of the Wu clan and the Five Elements' Great Emperor had forced him to abandon his neutral stance. Although he looked impressive on the surface, his long robes were filled with frightening injuries. These injuries had all been inflicted by the shaman tribe's ancestral shaman and the Five Elements' Great Emperor. Not only that, but the Protoss he controlled had also suffered heavy casualties. His eldest son had even died in that war. Now that the God Emperor had announced an alliance with Ji Yuan, how could the emotional God Monarch agree? He was also afraid of the God King, so he secretly chose the most suitable speaker among the many gods, which was the Lord God. After that, he used what he thought was the most obscure method to completely mobilize the emotions of all those who had opposing opinions on this alliance. All of this was to prevent the emergence of this alliance. In the end, he had been discovered. The Emperor God did not get angry at the Lord God and the true gods. Instead, he found the source of the problem. Orbis, do you know that your current position was given to you by this emperor? Subordinate. The emotional god king, who was being strangled, was unable to speak. This emperor admires the power of your emotions and bestows upon you the position of emotional god king. If you know how to be grateful, you should obediently serve this emperor. But what are you doing now? Mobilizing the emotions of the true gods to question this emperor? Many of the true gods were shocked. Had the emotional god king used the power of his emotions to mobilize the true god's emotions? Those true gods who had a neutral opinion towards this alliance looked at each other and understood what was going on. No wonder there were so many people clamoring. It was all because of the emotional god king. Do any of you know why Orbis interfered with this alliance? Hasn't he always maintained a neutral attitude? Why is he suddenly opposing it so fiercely now? At some point, Yale had left his position and walked to the Lord God's side. The war goddess had set up a barrier beforehand, which was why Yale asked this question. I heard that in order to force the Freedom God King and Pleasure God King back, the shamans launched an attack on the extraterritorial god race. The East god race suffered the most. Attack the extraterritorial god race? Yale's eyes widened. He actually didn't know about this. Our North god race was also attacked, but you were in confinement at the time. No one dared to disturb you for something like this. However, our North god race didn't suffer too much damage. Only the Qing family suffered some injuries. No one died. All right, I understand. Yale waved his hand lightly. In his heart, however, he was angry at the god emperor for confining him and the master of the law for sealing his deity ocean. He was the god king of the North god race, but he didn't know that his race was under attack. Considering that his subordinates were just sharing his burden, he didn't say anything to reprimand them. Even so, this definitely won't affect Orbis's conditions. The emotional god king's eldest son, Auro, is also dead, the war goddess said. Hearing this, Yale instantly understood. He quickly left the war goddess's position and returned to his own. Your Majesty. Without god power, Yale could only use his meaty voice to shout. Your Majesty, please consider the fact that the emotional god king has worked hard for the god race for so many years and spare him this time. For the sake of the god race, don't let any more god kings fall. Right now, the god race only has us 2 god kings left. He definitely couldn't let the emotional god king die just like that. He hated Ji Yuan, so there was a high chance that he would be Yang Kai's ally in the future. If Yang Kai didn't take such a great helper under him or make him stand on his side, he would feel like he was at a disadvantage. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. As soon as Yale finished speaking, all the gods of the North god race spoke up. The mighty god race army knelt on the ground. The gods of the East god race also pleaded on behalf of their god king. Oomph. With a heavy snort, the god emperor pushed the emotional god king away. The emotional god king, who had finally broken free, coughed violently. He didn't forget to kneel as well. Thank you for your benevolence, Your Majesty. Orbis, don't forget who gave you everything you have. This matter will end here. If I find out that you dare to do this again or go against the alliance, I will naturally be able to take back what I gave you. Glaring fiercely at the emotional god king, the gods who had lost their emotions, especially the master god, hurriedly knelt down and buried their heads into the ground. Chapter 1873. Your Majesty, I'll see you off here. Outside the god realm, Elder Lin stood by Yi Zichen's side as he bid the god emperor farewell. Under the god emperor's heavy-handed policies, none of the gods dared object. They all knelt and obeyed the god emperor's proclamation to ally with the epic era. The epic era had many matters to attend to, so Yi Zichen couldn't stay for long. That's fine. As he spoke, the god emperor glanced at the gods behind him. I'm afraid I'll need to mediate the internal affairs of the god realm as well. Heavy-handed policies aren't the way to solve problems. I'll have to go back and calm the people down. I've troubled you, Your Majesty, said Yi Zichen. It's no problem. This is how things should be. The God Emperor laughed. You don't understand the current state of the God realm, master of the stars. Although we don't have internal strife and external aggression, we're more or less in the same boat. Even if you hadn't ascended, an alliance with the epic era would have been necessary. Yi Zichen chuckled. The God Emperor cupped his fists heartily. We'll part ways here. We'll part ways here. A black hole-like vortex appeared before them, and they walked into it, shoulder to shoulder. Yi Zichen passed through the black hole gate with relative ease. The epic era and the God realm were billions of miles apart, but in a few breaths of time, they arrived outside the epic era. When he looked down, he saw the third era, the place where the gods, Yao, and demons lived. Yi Zichen gazed off into the distance and saw a tiny, azure planet. This was the home he often dreamed of. He knew the way home. Unfortunately, he couldn't go back yet. Do you see it? Elder Lin noticed Yi Zichen's gaze and chuckled. This world had long since been imprinted in his mind. He didn't even need to look to know where Yi Zichen was looking. That water-covered planet used to be his favorite place. It was there that he'd met the love of his life. He'd once wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, but she had her own destiny. All he could do was watch her grow old and leave him. I see it. What a beautiful planet. No matter how you look at it, it's brimming with life. Unlike the foreign realm celestial race and the third era's celestial race, they look like withered leaves from the outside. Elder Lin sighed. Yes. Yi Zichen's eyes were filled with indescribable emotion. It was just as Elder Lin had said. Of all the planets he'd seen, the one he'd once lived on was the most beautiful. However, there are still many people who were not grateful for the blessing of this planet and wantonly destroyed the ecological environment here. If he could return one day, Yi Zichen would do everything in his power to protect this beautiful planet. Do you want to go back? Elder Lin smiled. Hearing that, Yi Zichen looked towards Elder Lin. Do you want to go back? Of course, he wanted to go back. After running around for so long, who would say they didn't want to go back? However, the current me doesn't seem to be qualified to go back yet. I will go back. Elder Lin patted him on the shoulder and said, After you settle the matters here, I will judge whether or not I can let you return to that planet. Don't blame me. This old man also likes that place very much. I don't want it to be threatened at all. You're the mighty king of the laws. Can't you protect a planet? Asked Yi Zichen. Some things are not as simple as you think. Elder Lin sighed indifferently. There are actually far too many things in the Milky Way that the Divine Emperor and I cannot control. When Yi Zichen saw that Elder Lin seemed to want to say something, he glanced at him a few more times, but didn't reply. I don't like trouble. All right, you and the Divine Emperor seem to have quite a few secrets, but I'm not really interested right now. Don't tell me. Even if you do, I won't listen. Yi Zichen shrugged. You. Elder Lin smiled helplessly. What he didn't know was that even if Yi Zichen wanted to listen, he wouldn't tell him right now. There are some things that the current Yi Zichen can't know. Oh, right. When we left, the Divine Emperor seemed to be acting a bit strange. At that moment, Yi Zichen suddenly recalled the last time he saw the Divine Emperor before entering the black hole. At the time, he felt that the Divine Emperor's expression was very strange, but since Elder Lin had already entered the black hole, Yi Zichen didn't ask him about it. Something's wrong with him? Yi Zichen nodded, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong. It was just a feeling. It felt like something was wrong with him. Perhaps it's because you agreed to our request and let go of the heavy burden weighing down on your heart. He can't help but want to vent his emotions, but he has to restrain himself in front of you. That's why you find it strange, right? Elder Lin laughed, but didn't take Yi Zichen's words to heart. You don't need to worry about him. Didn't you keep saying that the situation in your era is terrible? Go back and deal with it as soon as possible. Once you're done, you can contact me through Linru. Linru? That's right. Not long ago, I sent her to your era. She should be in Chaos City right now, right? The Divine Emperor watched as the two of them left. When the black hole disappeared from his sight, his face, which had been maintaining a smile, instantly turned extremely pale. He endured the pain, found a flowing boulder, and sat down. Then he took out a red pill and popped it into his mouth. His divine power surged, causing the pill's effect to spread, but before long. Ugh! The divine emperor coughed up a mouthful of blood. Some of it landed on his palm. When he looked at his palm, he saw that the blood wasn't pure gold. The blood was murky and tainted with filth. Huh! The god emperor, who was sitting on the huge rock, smiled weakly. At this moment, he didn't even know how far he had left the god race with the huge rock. He couldn't help but smile wryly. He lay back on the boulder, looked up at the chaos, and muttered to himself, "Are you in such a hurry? Don't be in such a rush. What's yours will be yours sooner or later. You've already waited for so long. How about you give me 10,000 more years? I'm not asking for much. All I want is 10,000 years. Can't you wait that long?" To his surprise, as soon as he said that, the divine emperor's face regained some color, and the feeling of weakness in his body also disappeared. He stood up from the boulder and looked around. For some reason, a light sigh flashed in his eyes. "You really are heartless." Chapter 1874. As the divine emperor and the others left, the Protoss also returned to their respective palaces. Yale sat in the divine palace. His face was so sunken that it seemed like it was about to drip water. The entire divine palace was filled with a heavy atmosphere, and the over-gods beneath him did not even dare to breathe too loudly. None of them dared to disturb him. Alliance. He really dares to say that. The enraged Yale gritted his teeth and snorted. The other main gods looked down at the red carpet in the palace. Everyone could see that Yale was very angry about the alliance between the Protoss and Ji-Yuan. In their hearts, the alliance was not a big deal. Ji-Yuan did not affect the interests of the god race, nor did he take the initiative to provoke them. It had always been their god race who took the initiative to attack them and destroy them. No one knew why Yale was so angry about this. "Your Majesty, please be careful with your words." The war goddess tried to persuade Yale despite his anger. "Careful with my words?" Yale grinned at the war goddess. To be honest, it was the war goddess who was trying to persuade him. If it was someone else, he might... Well, now that his deity ocean was sealed, he could not do anything to these main gods. Oomph. Don't tell me I can't grumble. He did not even discuss the most basic thing with the divine emperor and the main gods. He made the decision on his own. He can force everyone to agree to this alliance. But does he want to deprive me of my right to complain? Not to mention that he is no longer a Protoss. Even if he is in this palace now, I will say it. The main gods kept quiet out of fear. It seemed like their king was really angry. In the past, Yale had never had such a big problem with the divine emperor. Now that he said this, it was obvious that the alliance had touched his bottom line. What was the reason? Could it be that Qing Li from the Qing family? It was said that before Yale became the God King of Destruction, he was childhood friends with the talented lady of the Qing family, Qing Li. He was also brothers with her brother, Sword of Heaven and Earth, Qing Lan. However, Qing Li got together with Gu Xuanda from the First Era. After that, Yale inexplicably hated the First Era. He even attacked the First Era, which had already transcended, as if he was venting some kind of anger. In private, he had been planning to destroy the Third Era. If we think of it that way, doesn't that mean Yale versus Qing Li, the sovereigns didn't dare to continue thinking about this? If Yale were to find out that they were spying on their lord's private matters, when the seal on his deity sea was broken, they would not be able to bear the consequences. But looking at the war goddess's appearance, she did bear some resemblance to Qing Li. "Your Majesty." The war goddess continued to try and persuade the enraged Yale. Suddenly, Yale looked at the goddess of war. The scarlet light in her eyes caused the surrounding main gods to break into a cold sweat for the war goddess. Yale continued to stare at the war goddess. After a long time, Yale silently restrained his anger. "Understand, it's good that His Majesty has regained his rationality." The war goddess nodded lightly and returned to her seat. The other main gods looked on in bewilderment. So many exhortations were just to help Yale regain his rationality? What was going on? Just as they were still in shock, they heard Yale laugh indifferently as he looked at the entrance of the divine palace. "You're really something. You can even manipulate my emotions. You really have what it takes to be a god king." At this moment, the other main gods felt their hearts skip a beat. Wasn't he talking about the emotional god king? The emotional god king was in the divine palace of destruction. Looking at the entrance of the hall, there was nothing strange at all. But just as Yale finished speaking, the emotional god king and the other main gods under him appeared at the entrance. They didn't return to the emotional god palace. This main god under you is really amazing. Out of all the main gods in this palace, only she sensed it. Yale, you've picked up a treasure. Emotional god King Orbis laughed out loud as he walked in with a majestic gait. Oomph. Yale snorted noncommittally. He signaled the attendant beside him with his eyes, and the attendant immediately left. Before long, a chair appeared beside Yale. Sit. The emotional god king took a few steps forward and sat down. The main gods he brought all stood at the side of the divine palace. You didn't return to the emotional god palace. What are you doing here? Yale asked. Weren't you the one who asked me to come? Emotional divine king took out a needle-like leaf from his bosom and placed it on the table between the two of them. This is a leaf that only your northern god clan has. Before I left, I saw this leaf land on my collar, so I came uninvited. Then I have to say that you've misunderstood. Yale smiled indifferently. He did not admit it, but kept the leaf in his pocket. Seeing this, the emotional god king raised his eyebrows slightly. He shrugged and smiled, not saying anything more. All right, it seems like I've been overthinking. But since we're here and want to sit here, the god king of destruction shouldn't chase us away, right? Why would he? Take a seat. Following Yale's words, 8 more chairs appeared in the palace. The two main gods sat opposite each other. At this moment, Yale also spoke as if he was having a casual conversation. No one saw us coming, right? Now that the two of us are meeting, it's inevitable that others will gossip. Who dares? The emotional god king snorted. Right now, there are only 2 god kings in the god clan. I really can't think of anyone who dares to offend our 2 god palaces. But when I came here, I came through subspace. The main gods under you didn't seem to notice, right? Naturally, no one else would notice as well. Just as he finished speaking, the emotional god king glanced at the war goddess. Except for this goddess, the war goddess did not smile. Even when the emotional god king smiled at her, she still kept a straight face without any expression. The emotional god king touched the tip of his nose and changed the topic. I wonder what the god king of destruction thinks about the god emperor's alliance. What else can he do? Yale said helplessly. The god emperor has already announced to the world that Ji Yuan is the god clan's ally. As a subordinate, I can only follow. The god king of destruction is pretending to be confused. I'm really confused. Yale's face was filled with confusion. The emotional god king suddenly came in my place and said such strange things. I really don't understand what you're trying to say. The main gods from both sides also looked at each other. The 2 god kings each had their own ulterior motives. Actually, there were some things that both sides were well aware of. It was just a matter of who was willing to expose everything first. Alas, the emotional god king might be more urgent. Since the god king of destruction doesn't understand, then I'll explain it to you more clearly. Chapter 1875. Alliance. When Xiao Yumei and the others heard Yi Zichen's words, their hearts filled with astonishment. Yi Zichen had been gone for several days. It was hard not to worry. No matter what, he'd gone to the outside god race, which happened to be in the middle of a war with Ji Yuan. The god king's deaths were likely caused by their internal strife. The gods of the outside realm would also push the blame onto the era. Yi Zichen was the lord of the Emperor's Star, the era's supreme ruler. Naturally, their hatred for Yi Zichen came from within. However, when Yi Zichen returned to Chaos City, he told them he'd formed an alliance with the outside god race. Everyone who heard this was shocked speechless. After a while, Xiao Yumei laughed, looked around, then turned to Yi Zichen. This might seem like a good thing. Perhaps. Yi Zichen wasn't confident. In truth, he didn't have much faith in this alliance. The Outerium god race currently only had 2 god kings. Looking at the situation back then, the emotional god king had already expressed his opinion on the alliance very directly. He'd rejected it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used the grand owl of emotions to stir up the god's emotions. Although Yale hadn't explicitly rejected it, Yi Zichen was certain that he had opposing views on the alliance as well. If both god kings felt the same way, what was the point of this alliance? Even the god emperor, with his current cultivation and might, could suppress the gods, over gods, and god kings into submission. I believe everyone understands the principle of bouncing back after hitting the bottom. The current outside god race was like a spring. If you suppressed it to the point where it couldn't be suppressed any longer, it would spring back up. When that happened, Yi Zichen really didn't know what the god emperor would do to maintain the alliance. Kill those rebels from the extraterritorial gods? At least, Yi Zichen couldn't think of a suitable solution. Su Meier frowned. She'd been in a terrible mood ever since she heard this news. Especially after Xiao Yumei's comforting words, her brows furrowed even more. She'd been holding in for so long. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She blurted out the words in her heart. That's a good thing? I don't think it's a good thing. Yi Zichen couldn't help but glance at her. When Yi Zichen noticed her expression, he couldn't help but arch his brows. In fact, he had always been suspicious about Su Meier's identity. She'd appeared out of the blue. At first, Yi Zichen thought she was the Five Elements' Great Emperor's daughter, but then he found out that the Five Elements' Great Emperor's lovers were the Fox Empress and clan head, and that they had no children. Su Meier's identity was like a cloud of doubt lingering in his heart. Then, when the god race attacked, they rushed to Chaos City. Her words were filled with her understanding of the outer realm celestial race, especially the old man beside her, who seemed to have a direct conflict with God Monarch Joy. One must know that even the great emperors of the previous era only had a smattering of knowledge about the outer world. How did they know so much? And now, Su Meier was questioning him furiously. How many things had this girl been hiding from them? Meier, Xiao Yumei smiled gently. Perhaps you have your own thoughts on this matter. However, for the entire era, this alliance is truly a blessing. Xiao Yumei's voice was soft and gentle. When he heard her, he felt as if his heart had calmed down somewhat. She smiled warmly, looked at Su Meier, and pulled her into her arms. Think about it this way. Even though the Outerium god race has lost 2 god kings, there's still a plane that has existed for countless years. The strength of their race is not something we can imagine. The era's internal problems have yet to be resolved, and they've suffered countless casualties. In terms of overall strength, they're far weaker than them. If we don't ally with them, will they continue to attack us? If they attack, how will Ji Yuan defend against them? In other words, even if we don't ally with them, we can't do anything to them. Zichen should be the strongest in the current era, but just ask him, is he confident enough to take on the God Emperor? When he heard that, Yi Zichen instinctively shook his head. The God Emperor's cultivation was simply too high. Standing before him, Yi Zichen felt as if he were standing in a cloud of mist. He couldn't see through the God Emperor's strength at all. His every movement seemed to fuse with heaven and earth. This was a realm where countless great Daos fused into one body. At the very least, Yi Zichen couldn't do it right now. Right now, he might be the equivalent of the Outer Realm God Kings, and that was only a relatively rash estimate. If the God Kings used some unknown trump card, the odds of victory would be uncertain. Su Meier fell silent. How could she not know this? However, an alliance wasn't as simple as a truce. She and the Outer Realm God race had irreconcilable differences. At the very least, until the person she hated died, she couldn't accept an alliance. Give the era some time. At that moment, Xiao Yumei smiled warmly and took Su Meier's hands in her own. The warmth of her palms flowed through Su Meier's icy hands and into her entire body. She couldn't help but feel a warm current slowly flow through her chest. The era's overall strength is still too weak. Give it some time, and we'll grow a little stronger. There were conflicts between the outer domain celestial race and the epic era. With such conflicts existing, the alliance between the two sides wouldn't last long. Perhaps the God Emperor and Zichen both want to ally. Both planes can live in harmony. But even if we don't, the Outer Realm God race will destroy this alliance. I'm sure Zichen knows this as well. which is why he agreed. In truth, he's only trying to buy time for the Era God race. He had to admit, Xiao Yumei really was a smart woman. Unlike Yi Zichen, she hadn't personally witnessed the Outer Realm God race's situation. Most of her understanding of the Outer Realm God race came from Yi Zichen or someone else. The only time she had a deep understanding of the outside was when he'd been imprisoned in the North God race. Even with these bits and pieces of information, she was still able to see the problem clearly. Not only that, but when she was wise and far-sighted, she knew how to conceal her own brilliance. If she had to say something, she would say it. If she didn't, she wouldn't say a single word. She was more than willing to stand silently behind Yi Zichen and help him solve his problems. It was said that behind every successful man, there was a woman who silently supported him. It was rumored that Zhuge Liang, famed for his intellect, was no less clever than his wife, Huang Yueying. She told him all of his brilliant plans. Chapter 1876. When Sumei heard that, she looked at Yi Zichen and saw him nod at her. Buying time was a must. Xiao Yumei had hit the nail on the head. Their current alliance was to buy time. Given the God race's enmity with Ji Yuan, an alliance was nothing more than a pipe dream. Given Ji Yuan's current strength, it was impossible for him to defeat the God race. With the God Emperor above him, it would take God King emotion and God King destruction quite some time to overthrow the alliance. What Ji Yuan needed to do was to take advantage of this opportunity to recuperate and build up his strength. See? Big Sister was right, wasn't she? Xiao Yumei grasped Su Mei's hand and smiled warmly at her, then turned to Yi Zichen. The Divine Time artifact still has plenty of space and plenty of spiritual energy. Should we? That's exactly what I was thinking, said Yi Zichen confidently. The Divine Time artifact was the First Era's greatest bargaining chip. It was a gift from the First Era to the Third Era, the greatest opportunity to turn the tables on the God race. The flow of time within the artifact increased according to its wielder's strength. Back then, Xiao Yumei's cultivation was relatively high, and the flow of time was roughly stable at 1,001. But now that Yi Zichen had transcended, and the divine artifact was his to wield, he was confident that there would be even more room to improve the flow of time. Then I'll erase the mark on the artifact and hand it over to you. It won't affect the people inside, will it? There were still many geniuses of the Yao and God race inside. If the divine artifact's new owner caused their comprehension to go awry, it'd be troublesome. I don't think so. Xiao Yumei pursed her lips and hesitated for a moment. As its wielder, I have some sort of connection to the divine time artifact. If nothing unexpected happens, I'll erase the mark and hand it over to you. At most, the flow of time inside will fluctuate a bit. However, the spiritual energy inside and its Tao won't go haywire. His Tao will not go haywire, and they won't feel anything when they are in it. All right, in that case, give me the divine artifact. Xiao Yumei nodded solemnly and left. At the same time, Yi Zichen sends a message. Although they'd formed an alliance, that absolutely wasn't a reason for Ji Yuan to relax. Only by constantly improving one's own strength could one not panic when encountering unexpected situations in the future. Furthermore, Yi Zichen had just returned from the God Realm. He knew full well that in the future, they might have to face more than just the God Realm. The Milky Way galaxy was huge, and there were many races. The challenges would never end. Divine Palace. In front of the majestic palace, two godly kings of the God race, who held an important position in the God race, stood before the palace. However, the two God kings seemed to have encountered some trouble. They were mighty God kings, yet they were unable to even enter the hall. Lord Ob's, Lord Yale. Surprisingly, there were two white-haired elders in front of the divine palace. Looking at the wings on their backs, one could tell that they were the experts of the Angel Clan, a special clan of the extraterritorial Divine Clan. The Divine Emperor is currently not in the palace. Please return, Divine Kings. In the end, Yale agreed to Orbis' words, or rather, he had this thought from the start. Unfortunately, when the two of them came to the Divine Palace, they did not see the Divine Emperor and were even given the cold shoulder. Moreover, the two of them did not dare to use violence against the two elderly angels in front of them. To be able to make the God Kings feel fear, it was because the two of them were eight-winged angels. If Yale's deity C had not been sealed, they could have barged into the divine palace without any resistance. However, Yale did not have divine power. With just the emotional God King, who was not good at fighting, it would not be easy for him to barge in. Emissaries, before I came, I heard the news that the divine emperor had returned and seemed to be injured, so I specially came to visit him. However, the two of you said that the divine emperor is not here. Isn't this a little? Lord Ob's actually planted spies in the divine palace. The emotional God King's expression changed drastically as he hurriedly took a few steps back in fear. Since you didn't, how did you know that the divine emperor had returned to the palace and that the divine emperor was injured? The elderly angel smiled. The divine emperor is the number one person in this world. Who could possibly injure the divine emperor? Right now, the divine emperor is indeed not in the palace. Before he left, he asked us two old fellows to help him take a look at the divine palace. The divine emperor is indeed not in the palace. If the two of you really have something to discuss with the divine emperor, come back in a few days. Yes. The emotional God King did not dare to say anything else. He gave the destruction God King a look and left. The two elderly angels standing in front of the palace looked at each other inexplicably. Their eyes flashed with a light sigh. We're leaving just like that? Yale frowned. What else can we do? OB said with a sunken expression. Could it be that I have to argue with those two old fellows and continue to admit to planting spies around the divine palace? In other words, the divine emperor is indeed injured. Of course, and his injuries are very serious. OB said, my subordinates said that when the divine emperor returned, he was carried back by the angel race. He had already lost his consciousness. After that, there were two eight-winged angels guarding the door. Then what are you and I afraid of? Huh? The emotional God King sneered. You want to barge in? Why not? Yale said, what are you going to use to barge in? Wait for this seat to barge in. Then you can sit back and enjoy the fruits of my labor. If it succeeds, you will benefit greatly. If it fails, you can say that you were restricted by me. Yale, I was able to stand in the God race for so many years, not because of those two idiots. OBs looked deeply at Yale and said, let's forget about our previous discussion. Let's wait for the angel race to leave the divine palace before making further plans. As soon as he finished speaking, Orbis left through space. Looking at the few chief gods already waiting at the border of the northern god race, Yale could not help but curse. Coward! The divine emperor being injured was definitely a rare opportunity for them. Just the angel race guarding the door had scared OBs to this extent. Yale snorted disdainfully. If not for his deity C being sealed, he would definitely take this opportunity to attack and overthrow the divine emperor's regime. Your Majesty! The sovereigns under Yale rushed over. When they saw Orbis leave and Yale's furious expression, they didn't dare to say anything or ask too many questions. Return to the divine palace. Thinking about how OBs let go of such a good opportunity, Yale was filled with anger. They still had to wait for the angel race to leave. If the angel race could leave, didn't that mean that the divine emperor was safe and sound? At that time, so what if they went? If the two of them worked together, would they even be a match for the divine emperor? They should not have cooperated with such a coward. Yale suddenly felt some regret. Why did he plead for OBs back then? Such an ally. It was better for the divine emperor to strangle him to death. However, a question lingered in Yale's mind. Chapter 1877. Divine Palace. At the end of the corridor was a bookshelf filled with books. From the outside, the bookshelf did not look special, but as long as one moved the books on the bookshelf, one would realize that there was a whole new world here. Behind the bookshelf, there was a room. The room reeked of blood, and one could see patches of black gold blood stains on the ground. Walking along the blood stains, one could see a person covered in blood lying on the bed in a narrow room. Beside the bed, there was an old man wearing a white robe. He had a basin of water by his hand, and he was constantly using a white cloth to wipe the blood off his body. Not long later, the ground was filled with blood-colored cloth. King, Emotion God King and Destruction God King have just arrived. At this moment, the person who appeared in the room was the old woman who guarded the door. She was slightly bent over, and the wings on her back were completely retracted. She looked no different from a normal person. Got it. The old man sighed, and the white cloth was still wiping the God Emperor's body. When the bloodstains on his body were slightly cleaned, he realized the God Emperor's injuries were not light. The old woman in the room was horrified. From her point of view, the God Emperor's injuries were too severe. His shoulders, abdomen, and limbs, it was covered with horrifying bloody holes. Fresh blood flowed out of the bloody hole, which was why the old man by the bed kept wiping his body. Lord God Emperor, I can only say that he is lucky. The old man sighed, and the white cloth in his hand turned from white to black gold. He threw it to the ground beside the bed, and a new cloth covered it. Fortunately, the injuries are not fatal. Although there are other energies tearing at his body, his realm is more solid, and he does not have any impure energy. However, his realm is more solid, and he doesn't have any modeled power. It won't be long before his power devours the other power in his body. But how did Lord God Emperor get so heavily injured? The old woman's eyes were filled with confusion, let alone the Outerium celestial race, for any race. The God Emperor was the strongest in this world. He had always been the one hurting others, and she really could not think of anyone who could injure him to this extent. Did the God Emperor get plotted against by other planes? The old woman said. This was the only reason she could think of. The God Emperor might have been plotted against by other planes. The old man shook his head. I do not know. After a long time, he spat out these words. He didn't know what the Divine Emperor had experienced. Was it a plot, or did he really meet someone he couldn't fight against? He didn't know. He only knew that the Divine Emperor had asked him to pick him up not long ago. When the old man arrived at the place mentioned by the Divine Emperor, he saw the dying Divine Emperor, who seemed to have exhausted the last of his strength to spit out a few words. Let's go. That was all the communication between the God Emperor and the old man. There was nothing else. It was also his idea to let the two 8-winged angels guard the door. He guessed that the God King would definitely come to visit at this time. At this moment, the only people in the God clan that could make them feel slightly fearful were the two 8-winged angels, who had already lived in seclusion. In fact, the old man really hoped that he was thinking too much. He didn't expect that they would really come. Sister, I'll have to trouble you and brother-in-law to stay for a few more days. The old man looked at the old woman with a sincere expression, his murky eyes filled with a myriad of thoughts. Sure, it just so happens that I have nothing to do with that person. The old woman smiled and didn't refuse. Then, she looked at the Divine Emperor, her eyes filled with worry. The Divine Emperor, how long will this state last? That depends on him. The old man sighed. Even though the old man was the king of the angel clan, he felt powerless in the face of the Divine Emperor's current situation. There seemed to be a dark power in his body. It was also this dark power that was wreaking havoc in his body, causing his injuries to be unable to stabilize. The power of the angel clan was the nemesis of darkness. But his holy power couldn't do anything to that dark power. This was a darkness that surpassed holiness. Moreover, this dark power didn't seem to have just invaded his body. It seemed to have existed in his body for countless years. The Angel King didn't have a deep personal relationship with the Divine Emperor. He didn't know what the Divine Emperor had experienced in the past for this darkness to remain in his body for so long. All right, then I'll leave you here. Don't worry. As long as I and that person are here, no one can step into the Divine Palace. The old woman left with a serious expression. The old man nodded at her and began to wipe the golden black blood off his body. The Divine Emperor is seriously injured. The Divine Emperor is seriously injured. Inside the Divine Palace of Destruction, there was no one except for the Divine King of Destruction, Yale, who was sitting in the hall. His mind was filled with this sentence. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If only the emotional Divine King had been a little stronger, even though there were two 8-winged angels guarding the door and not letting them in. But these two angels were already in their twilight years. How could their holy power be a match for the emotional divine king, who was in the prime of his life? The two of them could have ignored the two eight-winged angels and barged into the divine palace to investigate the divine emperor's specific situation. If the divine emperor wasn't as strong as they thought, they could say that they were worried about the divine emperor's safety. They couldn't ignore the divine emperor's safety and wanted to visit him to ask if he needed the divine medicine. If the divine emperor was really seriously injured to the point that he had lost consciousness, the eight-winged angels were guarding the door, so the ones guarding the divine emperor would at most be the angel king. At that time, he and the emotional divine king, the two great divine kings, would raise their arms and call for help. All the overgods under them would rush over and use the emotional divine king's emotional power to urge the overgods of the other two divine palaces. Yale hated it. He hated that his deity ocean was sealed. Such a good opportunity was wasted because of the emotional divine king, that coward. Why is the divine emperor so injured? Could it be that what Stark said was true? Yale couldn't help but frown. He couldn't help but recall what Stark said when he invited him to form an alliance and overthrow the regime. The divine emperor has a fatal weakness. The weakness is that he has long been eroded by a mysterious dark power. It will relapse 3 times a month. At that time, his rel will be less than 10%, and it will be very difficult for him to use his divine power. Could it be true? How long will this deity ocean seal take? Yale kept trying to activate the divine power in the deity ocean, but the connection between him and the deity ocean will be mercilessly cut off as soon as it was established. Damn it. Chapter 1878. The New Era. Old Lord Taishan's medicine was a great success. Regardless of whether they were Yao, demon, or god, after taking the medicine, no one infected by the reincarnators would become infected. As soon as the medicine circulated, the situation within the New Era was under control. Under the disdainful efforts of the great emperors and era experts, those who had reincarnated from their mothers were all killed. However, what they felt after the end wasn't joy at surviving a calamity. Rather, it was unspeakable pain. After all, the reincarnators were all people from the New Era. Most of them were the relatives and friends of the current survivors. Killing them meant they personally slaughtered their loved ones. Of them, the Ocean Emperor's situation was the worst. Zhou had to pass through the Northern Divine Mountain before heading to the 10th Divine Mountain. The entire Shui clan was buried in his hands. This meant that the Ocean Emperor's siblings, nephews, and nieces, they'd all become targets of his purge. Over the past month, he practically wept. He was the only one who knew how tormented his heart was. Chaos City. The purge of the reincarnators was nearing its end. There was no need for the great emperors to personally take action. Coincidentally, the Master of the Stars had come looking for them. Instantly, all the major powers gathered in Chaos City. Star-Lord Yi, they cupped their fists at Yi Zichen. They were currently on a plane. They were confused as to why he'd invited them to a place like this, but when they saw Yi Zichen, they still greeted him. No matter how close they'd once been to Yi Zichen, he'd transcended from the previous era. They couldn't just casually cross the line between them. Great emperors, you've worked hard. Yi Zichen looked at the great emperors and smiled. Then his gaze suddenly turned serious, and he bowed deeply. Star-Lord Yi, why are you? The great emperors were terrified. They didn't dare accept his bow. It's all thanks to the great emperors that the new era's internal strife was pacified. As the Emperor Star, I didn't do anything at all. I'm truly ashamed. Star-Lord Yi, you're exaggerating. Not at all. This bow is only natural. Yi Zichen's eyes flashed with unquestionable light. The other great emperors could only smile bitterly and nod. After a long while, Yi Zichen looked up. The great emperors might not know why I've gathered all of you here. The great monarch nodded. I want to announce something to everyone here. Not long ago, I went to the Outerium celestial race and discussed the matter of an alliance with the God Emperor of the Outerium celestial race. Alliance? The great emperors were shocked. Yes, an alliance. Yi Zichen nodded affirmatively. In the future, the God race will be allies in the era of war. It's just that. The great sovereigns all looked over, waiting for his next words. Forming an alliance is actually not that simple. What? Could it be that the Outer Realm god race has made a request of us? The Bayan Emperor snorted. Of course not. You've known me for so long. Would I be the sort of person to sign an unfair contract? Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile wryly, then looked toward Xiao Yumei. Xiao Yumei took a few steps forward, then explained the internal situation of the god realm and the reason for their alliance to the great emperors. Only then did Yi Zichen speak. Finally, Yi Zichen said, "It's just as Yumei said, the god race has a lot of objections to the alliance. We don't know how long it'll last, but it'll buy us enough time. What we need to do during this time is continuously increase the era's overall strength." I agree with Star-Lord Yi. Wei Chen of the White Tiger clan nodded. Compared to the Outer Realm god race, the current era is like a newborn baby in the prime of his life. We're truly too weak. For example, during the god race's previous attack, they didn't actually do anything to us, but we were already flustered. Fortunately, the god race had internal strife. Otherwise, it's hard to say whether the era of war would still be around. The great emperors all agreed with Wei Chen's words. Everyone here was a reasonable man. Although it seemed like Wei Chen was making the era of war sound completely useless, that was the truth. For example, great emperors like them, they might not even be as strong as a lord god from the outside. With such an obvious gap, if the Outer Realm god race continued to attack, it would be very difficult to defend against them. Buying time was the best news for them. Once we get back, there's no need to go back. At that moment, Yi Zichen snapped his fingers. Like a miracle, the plains transformed into a majestic city. I wonder if you've noticed? What? Actually, you're already inside the time divine artifact. Yi Zichen chuckled. When the great emperors heard this, their eyes widened. Yi Zichen continued. Yi Zichen continued. The city before us is a manifestation of the time divine artifact. The divine artifact space is divided into 3 layers. The first layer flows at a rate of 2,000 to 1, suitable for those under the diviner level. The middle layer is 5,000 to 1, suitable for those under the divine general level. The top layer is 8,000 to 1, suitable for emperor-level experts. The great emperors were stunned. 8,000 to 1? What did that mean? Even though 1 day had passed in the outside world, 8,000 days had passed in the inside world. This is the most stable time flow I can maintain right now. Once my cultivation improves, I might be able to go even higher. You should be able to go even higher. The great emperors truly didn't know what to say. Yi Zichen smiled and said, "Don't worry." Yi Zichen smiled and said, "In the future, this place will be preserved in the form of a city. Great emperors and your clansmen can come and cultivate here at any time. Based on my rough estimations, this city should have no problem holding a few billion people. This city contains my understanding of the Tao of heaven and earth after reaching transcendence. Perhaps my understanding isn't as deep as the great emperors, but if the great emperors don't understand anything before, it'll be much easier to comprehend it through my understanding." They were dumbfounded. It could hold billions of people, increase the flow of time by 2,000, and even infuse the Tao of heaven and earth with it. Yi, the great sage, hurried over on his auspicious cloud. Yi Zichen gestured for Yumei to take charge, then nodded to the great emperors and walked up to the great sage. "Yi, there's a girl looking for you." "A girl? Do you know her?" "I don't, but I've seen her before." The great sage arched his brows. "She's the northern god who follows Yale around." "It's her." At the mention of the northern god, Yi Zichen couldn't help but recall the strange look in her eyes when they first met. Chapter 1879. Outside Chaos City, a woman stood in the shadow of the towering city walls. Yang Jian stood beside her. Judging from their expressions, they didn't seem to be talking at all. This silence made Yang Jian feel somewhat awkward. Just as he was hoping someone would step in and help him out, he saw the great sage and Yi Zichen walk out of the city gates. As if he'd just seen his savior, Yang Jian walked up to them. "Yi." Although Yang Jian didn't say anything unnecessary, Yi Zichen could still see the awkwardness on his face. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. They weren't familiar with each other. Even if Yang Jian had a frivolous personality in the heavenly court, this woman was no ordinary person. Furthermore, the third princess was present, so he didn't dare flirt with other women. Neither of them said anything. It was only natural that they'd feel awkward just standing there. She nodded at Yang Jian, patted him on the shoulder, and smiled. Yi Zichen walked in front of the woman. The woman in front of him had many titles. She was the strongest female god of the outside god race, or rather, the strongest woman of the god race, the number one figure beneath the god king of destruction. With so many titles, she was the goddess of war. Her appearance astonished Yi Zichen. You could also say that anyone else from the god realm who showed up at this time would astonish him. Lord of the epic star. This time, the goddess of war didn't have the complicated emotions she'd felt when she first met Yi Zichen. She stood calmly in front of him, and her tone was even. Goddess of war. Yi Zichen nodded and got straight to the point. Goddess of war, why have you come to our epic? Could it be that the god king of destruction, whose divine sea is sealed, wants to send us a message through you? As soon as he said that, Yi Zichen continued. Don't tell me the god king of destruction wants to challenge us? He seems to like it that way. But the god emperor just announced his alliance with the epic star. Isn't this a bit inappropriate? You really have a lot to say, said the goddess of war. Everyone could sense Yi Zichen's expression freeze. Yang Jian was the first to see him in such a predicament. He fought to hold back his laughter until his face turned bright red. After a brief silence, the goddess of war said, I didn't come here because Yale told me to. I came here of my own volition. Is that so? I don't have that kind of time in the city. This time, the goddess of war interrupted Yi Zichen's flowers once more. Yi Zichen stood in front of the city gates, looking utterly embarrassed. Then he heard the goddess of war say, the god emperor is in trouble. If Star-Lord Yi believes that an alliance with the god emperor is necessary, then take a few experts with you to the god emperor's divine imperial palace. We need your help. Suddenly, Yi Zichen frowned. His Majesty is in trouble? Who in the entire Milky Way galaxy could threaten the safety of the Emperor? Could it be that the Protoss had rebelled? With the God King of emotions around, stirring up the emotions of the people should be a piece of cake. However, the Divine Emperor had already spoken to such an extent. No matter how bold the emotional Divine King was, he wouldn't dare to do such a disgraceful thing. What would that be? He looked at the war goddess suspiciously. He had just left the Outer Realm celestial race not long ago. Now, someone came to tell him that the Emperor was in trouble. They were from the Shrine of Destruction. Yi Zichen had always been on guard against the God's Palace of Destruction. Yale was a god king who enjoyed his life by destroying planes. He definitely wouldn't allow the alliance to continue. Now that the war goddess had come, could this be Yale's ploy? That's all I have to say. Whether or not you believe me is up to you, said the war goddess, sensing Yi Zichen's suspicion, but she couldn't be bothered to explain. Can you tell me exactly what happened to the Divine Light? The God Emperor is heavily injured and is being cared for by the Angel King and 2 8-winged angels. The God King of Destruction and God King of Emotions both want to overthrow the God Emperor's rule and are secretly plotting how to deal with him. Not long ago, Yale sent people to investigate the God Emperor situation, said the war goddess. Heavily injured. That was too much. Elder Lin had told him himself that the God Emperor was already the strongest expert in the world. No one could harm him. Now he'd sold out 2 God Kings. For you to tell me this, isn't that a bit? Yi Zichen wanted to say something, but stopped himself. He was still testing the truth. You seem to be mistaken, Star-Lord of the Epic. From start to finish, I've been loyal to the God race. I've never been loyal to any one of them, much less any of the God Kings of the Divine Palaces, snorted the war goddess. Loyal to the God race. If that was the case, then the war goddess's words made sense. But that's all I have to say. Goodbye. Without giving Yi Zichen a chance to speak, the war goddess cupped her fists and left. Her departure was just as silent as her arrival. Yang Jian and the great sage had no idea where the war goddess had gone. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air in the first place. At that moment, An inexplicable question popped into Yi Zichen's mind. Does the epic lord of the epic have any children? Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes when the question popped up in his sea of consciousness. He knew the war goddess was asking him this, but he didn't know why. No, replied Yi Zichen. Before long, however, he added, I don't have any biological children, but I have a daughter with Yume in the modern realm. His response was like a stone sinking into the ocean. It was as if the war goddess had never asked this question at all. After Yi Zichen answered, he wondered if he was hallucinating or out of sorts. In the end, the war goddess had left. She hadn't said anything unnecessary. Yi, are we going? Asked the great sage. Yi Zichen didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lowered his eyes and thought for a while. Could this be Yale's sinister plot? But if it was true, and the God Emperor was seriously injured, he couldn't just stand by and watch. Right now, the God Emperor was needed to maintain the alliance between the epic and the God race. After much thought, it seemed that this trip to the God race was absolutely necessary. We have to go, Yi Zichen muttered to himself for a moment, then glanced at the great sage and Yang Jian. But you can't go. Everything on this trip is unknown. The God Kings of the Outer Realms aren't something you can stand up against. On this trip, I'll bring the venerable of numinous treasure and... Before he could finish speaking, holy light illuminated the sky above Chaos City. Yi Zichen and company immediately noticed the blinding light and looked over. Before long, the light faded slightly, revealing a female angel with 4 wings on her back. May I ask if you're the epic lord of the epic? Chapter 1880. Your Majesty. Yale, who was sitting on the throne, gestured for the chief god in the hall to keep quiet. The chief god didn't understand, but he saw Yale give him a look. There was someone else in the hall. Who would dare to eavesdrop in the God of Destruction Palace? If they were discovered, with the power of the God of Destruction Palace, even the God King wouldn't let them off easily. Yale's deity ocean was still sealed, so the chief god in the hall could only let him spread his divine sense to every corner of the hall and carefully investigate the surrounding situation. No one. This was the result of this chief god's investigation. He shook his head at the God King, indicating that there was no one else in the hall. Yale frowned deeply. Not long ago, he had clearly felt that there was someone else in the hall. However, there were no other chief gods around him, so he didn't dare to act rashly. Could it be that this person had already left? All right, you can continue. Yes. The chief god's expression froze. With a flip of his hand, a handful of soil stained with black gold and a bit of blood appeared in his palm. I followed your instructions and went to the surroundings of the divine Emperor Palace. This is the evidence that I found of the God King's injuries. Yale waved his hand lightly, and the chief god carefully sent the soil over. He pinched the soil with his fingers and put it in front of his nose. The smell of blood. He then checked the color of the soil. It was indeed a bit dark, and this kind of darkness inexplicably made his heart palpitate. One had to know that this was just a handful of soil with blood. The darkness that was left on it had already dried up, but even so, it still made him feel a little flustered. Stark didn't lie to him. The God King really had hidden injuries. Yale waved his hand to signal for the chief god to leave, then frowned. Why isn't the war goddess here yet? Your Majesty, you were looking for me. Before Yale finished speaking, a beautiful woman appeared in front of the hall. She took a few steps to the front of the hall, her eyes full of solemnity. This was her usual style when facing Yale. She always had a solemn face. You, seeing the war goddess appear, Yale's brows sank even deeper. Why did you take so long? Where did you go before? I went to the divine Emperor Palace. The war goddess placed her hand in front of her chest and bowed deeply. Please forgive me for delaying your summons, Your Majesty. Divine Palace? Yale's frown deepened. Everyone in the hall could feel the atmosphere gradually becoming heavy. Yes, the war goddess nodded. Why are you going to the Divine Palace? When you came back from the Divine Emperor Palace, I noticed that you didn't look well. I thought that something might have happened on the way and wanted to help you. So I went to the Divine Emperor Palace. Then what did you discover? I found these outside the Divine Palace. As she spoke, a handful of soil appeared in the goddess of war's palm. It was different from the soil of the Lord God in the hall. The war goddess was also holding the soil. At the gesture of the emperor, the soil was taken by the Lord God and sent to Yale. Just like before, he gently twirled his fingers and brought them to the tip of his nose. All of a sudden, Yale's grave expression disappeared. He said with a smile in his eyes, "That's very thoughtful of you. It seems like I need to talk to the other Lord gods. If everyone could be as meticulous as you and think about me, I would be able to save a lot of effort." "You flatter me, your majesty," the war goddess said. "Huh?" Yale laughed. Just now, he suspected that the person hiding in the hall was the war goddess. But now that she had taken out the soil, it proved that the person in the hall wasn't her. The Divine Emperor Palace was very far from the God of Destruction Palace of the Northern God clan. There was no way she could travel between the two in such a short period of time. "All right, all of you can leave. Your Majesty, I still have something to report." Just then, the war goddess spoke again. "Just now, when I was scouting around the Divine Emperor Palace, I discovered that the Aristar Lord came here again." Yale furrowed his brows. He was led by the Angel King's daughter, Princess Liluo. The Aristar Lord followed a few people with extraordinary auras into the Divine Emperor Palace. Yale's face turned green. The chief god in the hall saw his expression and lowered his head, not daring to raise it. After a long while, Yale's expression finally relaxed. "Your information is very important. I understand. All of you can leave now. I want to be alone for a while." "Understood." The war goddess and the chief god left the hall at the same time. The moment they left, Yale's expression was extremely twisted. His eyes seemed to be spewing fire as he sat in his chair in silence. "War goddess," the chief god called out to her. "What? If you want to talk about favors, then I will remember them," said the war goddess. No. The chief god shook his head. "I just want to know what you did just now and why. That's none of your business." The war goddess snorted. "I will remember the soil's favor. I will definitely repay it in the future. You can also go and tell Yale, but whether or not Yale will forgive you for deceiving him, I can't say for sure. Rhythm chief god, farewell." It's actually true. Even though he'd seen it with his own eyes, Yi Zichen still couldn't believe it. The invincible God Emperor was seriously injured. The God Emperor who was lying on the bed could be said to be on his last breath. The Angel King beside his bed also sighed softly. The God Emperor's safety concerns the future of the God race. "I'm afraid the angels alone won't be able to stop those ambitious bastards. I'll have to trouble you." "No problem." Yi Zichen was surrounded by experts on this trip to the outside. He was accompanied by Gu Xuanda, his wife Qingli, the numinous treasure sovereign, and the elder by Su Meier's side. All of them were half-step transcendence experts. Although they were a bit weaker than the God King, they weren't that far off. Yi Zichen gestured for the Angel King not to take it to heart. "The ambitious bastard you mentioned just now, but I only suspect." The Angel King didn't insist that Yale and the others were traitors. "No matter what, we need to ensure the God Emperor's safety." Then the God Emperor, "His condition has stabilized considerably, but we still don't know when he'll wake up," said the Angel King. "Do you know how the God Emperor got so heavily injured?" "I don't." The Angel King shook his head. "We'll have to wait until the God Emperor wakes up, then ask him yourself." Cough, cough, cough. At that moment, the God Emperor suddenly coughed violently. Chapter 1881. As the God Emperor slowly opened his eyes, everyone in the room couldn't help but hold their breaths. His pale face was no longer as imposing as before. Even though he was the God Emperor, right now, he was nothing more than a heavily injured patient who just regained consciousness. The Angel King let out a sigh of relief and dispersed the holy light in his hand. He took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the sweat from his face. He'd used up a lot of energy. In the past few days since the God Emperor's return to the Divine Palace, the Angel King hadn't stopped using his holy power to heal him. Although he was powerful, he was already in his twilight years. While he was healing, he needed to keep his holy power within a suitable range. Even the Angel King felt exhausted after being in such a tense state for so long. "Your Majesty, please don't torment my old bones in the future," said the exhausted Angel King with a sorrowful smile. "You've worked hard." As soon as he finished speaking, the Divine Emperor seemed to want to sit up from the bed. Unfortunately, he'd just woken up from his heavy injuries, so his body was still weak. He tried several times to sit up straight, but failed. Yi Zichen noticed this and walked up to him. He supported the God Emperor's back and helped him lean against the headboard. "I didn't think you'd alarm the Master of the Stars." The God Emperor nodded and thanked Yi Zichen, then glanced at his weak aura. "How embarrassing to let so many people see my miserable state. What's the big deal about that? How can you walk by the river without getting your shoes wet? For better or for worse, I'm the master of the Emperor's Star. They've seen me in such a miserable state, haven't they? Sometimes they even tease me about it, but I'm still fine, aren't I? You don't have to worry about them telling anyone else. I swear to you, only the people in this room will know about this. My people will absolutely keep it to themselves. If word gets out." Yi Zichen's companions didn't say anything. They knew full well that this wasn't the time for them to speak. Furthermore, even if they were major powers, the peak of their era, but they'd come to the outside with Yi Zichen. With the Transcendence era present, they shouldn't be the ones to discuss the situation with the God Emperor. However, they were also curious as to how the Divine Emperor could be so heavily injured. "This king doesn't like idle chatter," the Angel King said. "Haha, look at what you're saying. I didn't mean that." Yi Zichen grinned, then pointed at the room. "What I'm trying to say is, if outsiders find out, all they can say is that there's something wrong with the Divine Emperor's palace." The people in the room were all people who had lived for tens of thousands of years. There was no need to say anything else. They already knew what Yi Zichen was trying to say. The Divine Emperor, in particular, frowned slightly after hearing this. The Divine Palace is not like the other Divine Palaces. Those who can enter the Divine Palace are my trusted aides. Star-Lord Ye's worries are unwarranted. If that's the case, how did the God Kings learn of your heavy injuries in just a few hours? The Divine Emperor said nothing. He subconsciously glanced at the Angel King. Seeing the Angel King nod, the Divine Emperor on the bed patted the edge of the bed with both hands. His divine sense shook and instantly covered the entire Divine Palace. Then, he shrunk his divine sense to the size of a room and sealed the entire room. That's absolutely impossible. It was just as the Divine Emperor had said. Only his trusted aides could enter the Divine Palace. Their identities had been thoroughly investigated, and only after confirming that they weren't tainted by the other God Kings had they been allowed to enter the Divine Palace. The Angel King and Star-Lord Epic both told him that news of his heavy injuries had been leaked. You don't need to make such an arbitrary decision. The truth is right in front of you. The God King of Emotion and the God King of Destruction really did come here, and they clearly learned of your injuries. Of course, it's entirely possible that they didn't come from within your Divine Palace. It's also possible that other God Kings planted spies around your palace. "They're spies," said Yi Zichen. "How dare they?" The Divine Emperor angrily slammed his hands on the bed. In his fury, his limbs moved so much that the wounds he'd just managed to scab over started tearing again. Divine Emperor. In practically an instant, the Angel King unleashed his holy power and shone it on the Divine Emperor's wounds. These people are too impudent. They even have the gall to plant spies right under my nose. It seems they're up to no good. A solemn atmosphere enveloped the entire room. Although the Divine Emperor's body was very weak now, the dignified aura he'd gained only because he'd been in a high position for a long time now flowed uncontrollably from his body. Right now, he was like a wounded lion that was enraged, even though he was severely injured. Even though his injuries were severe, the animals around him didn't dare do anything to him. In the face of the Divine Emperor's rage, Yi Zichen merely smiled but said nothing. Good intentions? Naturally, the God King of Emotion and the God King of Destruction didn't. If what the War Goddess said was true, then the two God Kings were secretly plotting how to overthrow the Divine Emperor and usurp his throne. Yi Zichen knew this, but he didn't say it aloud. Planting spies had already made the Divine Emperor so angry. If he revealed this information, the Divine Emperor might actually cough up blood. After a long while, the Divine Emperor finally calmed his fury. My lack of discipline has caused Star-Lord Yi to laugh at me. Divine Emperor, you're too kind. It's just planting spies. It's pretty common. I've experienced it too many times, laughed Yi Zichen. The God Emperor didn't comment. The Angel King, who just stopped the scab from bursting open, retracted his hand. Your Majesty, please don't cause trouble. His tone was stern and admonishing. You should know your body's condition better than anyone else. If you tear open your wounds again, the consequences will be unimaginable. I understand, sighed the Divine Emperor. Yi Zichen looked back and forth between the Angel King and the Divine Emperor. He sensed something fishy was going on, but the Angel King had some misgivings and hadn't said everything. Yi Zichen licked his lips. Since he was already here, there were some things he naturally had to get to the bottom of, even if it could be troublesome. But the Divine Emperor was already heavily injured. His injuries meant that the events behind his back could affect the entire era, including the planet he'd once lived on. Yi Zichen absolutely couldn't let that happen. Your Majesty, there's something I don't understand. Chapter 1882. The Divine Emperor pretended to laugh frivolously, but no one else in the room could laugh. His words proved how serious the problem he was about to talk about was. It wasn't as simple as trouble. Yi Zichen rubbed the tip of his nose. To tell the truth, Yi Zichen wanted to retreat a bit. The higher his realm was, the more he felt that he was not in control of the entire situation. Instead, he felt more and more responsibility, and he felt more and more insignificant. The universe was too big. What he had encountered so far was merely an outworld celestial race. There were still many planes and races outside, and these races had the ambition to attack the divine race. If they wanted to attack, it meant that they had the strength to do so. Only when they were strong enough would they have such thoughts. If Yi Zichen went back and told the great emperors that he wanted to attack the outside realm and fight them to the death, he was sure that 80% of them would say that he didn't. Crazy. Therefore, he became more and more cautious, and he didn't like trouble. He was well aware of his own capabilities and knew that his abilities were limited. He did not want to get involved in matters that were beyond his capabilities. However, when he looked at Gu Xuanda and the others, he saw anticipation and curiosity in their eyes. They wanted to know what the Divine Emperor was going to say next. What's more, Yi Zichen had already made a decision that he wanted to know, and they were looking forward to it. Then I'll risk my life to accompany the gentleman. He nodded at the Emperor with determination in his eyes. The Emperor seemed to smile with relief, and the others in the room were all ready to listen. My injuries came from the eternal mystic realm. What? Universe secret region. The Angel King cried out almost as soon as the Emperor's voice trailed off. The exaggerated expression on his old and steady face looked very uncoordinated. It was obvious that he knew about the universe mystic realm. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so shocked. In contrast, when Yi Zichen heard about the secret realm of the universe, his expression was blank. Whether it was the venerable of Lingbao, the Gu couple, or the old man beside Sumer, they were all unfamiliar with this term. God Emperor, you aren't joking, right? A universe secret realm appeared here? The Angel King stared and frowned. The Divine Emperor nodded slightly, and the Angel King got up from the bed. After the words universe secret realm appeared, his actions became even more exaggerated. Even if Yi Zichen and the others didn't know what a secret realm was, they could guess from the Angel King's body language. How is this possible? The Angel King, who had circled the room several times, stopped and looked at the Emperor with bright eyes. Isn't this the Milky Way galaxy forged by the Milky Way Master? Since it's a forged object, it proves that it has no way to connect to the universe. Naturally, the secret realm of the universe wouldn't appear here. Maybe this is the greatness of the Milky Way Master. Actually, thousands of years ago, the Milky Way forged by the Lord was recognized by the universe and connected to it. You can ask Star-Lord Yi about this. The planet he once lived on has also discovered that there are other galaxies outside the Milky Way galaxy. Yes, Star-Lord Yi. The Angel King looked towards Yi Zichen. Actually, Yi Zichen was a bit confused as well, but he still nodded. Then he pointed at the emotional elder. The King of Angels is one of the few survivors of the Milky Way. After the Lord forged the Milky Way, he has been living here. In fact, in the current Milky Way galaxy, there are still many races that are survivors of the former Milky Way galaxy, the Emperor explained. Impossible. How is this possible? The Angel King couldn't help but pace around the room. It was clear that he was very anxious. That sort of anxiety was very noticeable on a big shot like him. King of Angels, the situation might not be as bad as you think, but it's definitely not optimistic, right? Said the Angel King. The Emperor didn't refute that. After a long time without receiving any response from the Shenhuang, who looked like an old man in his 80s or 90s, paced back and forth in the room like a young man who couldn't make up his mind, mumbling something that no one else could hear. The Emperor could only shrug and smile at the Angel King's reaction. God Emperor, shouldn't you tell us more about this universe secret realm? What's going on? The one who spoke was Gu Xuanda. Although he knew very well that he, a half-step transcendence cultivator, had no right to speak in front of the Emperor, Angel King, and Star-Lord G, he still spoke up. He couldn't help but want to know just what kind of existence a secret realm of the universe was. Do you still want to know now? The Emperor smiled. I'm giving you a chance. There are some things you know that might be a huge burden on you. No one said anything, but the determination in their eyes was clear. Yi Zichen was among them. He cared too much. Just what kind of existence was a secret realm of the universe? Why did the Angel King lose his composure after learning about it? Just what kind of story was hidden behind it? Both Yi Zichen and the others wanted to know too much. You might really regret your decision. The God Emperor sighed, then smiled. He reached out and pointed at Yi Zichen. Especially you. You'll definitely regret it, but I won't give you the chance to. None of you will. A secret realm of the universe is actually a secret treasury of the universe. I trust that your era has secret realms as well, right? You'll definitely find resources that will help you grow stronger. Perhaps it's pills, perhaps it's weapons and armor, or perhaps it's talisman puppets and other treasures that can help you grow stronger. However, treasures and danger often coexist in secret realms. Obtaining treasures isn't easy. The others nodded. Among them, Yi Zichen understood this the best. Right now, the Upheaval Alliance controlled virtually all of the secret realms in the lower lands. It was precisely because of their control that they had so many resources. The same is true for secret realms of the universe. Comparatively speaking, these secret realms are much larger than your eras, and the treasures inside are of much higher quality. The dangers inside are also greater, and the situation is more perilous. It's just like your era's secret realms. Danger and supreme treasures coexist. If you're lucky, you might be able to obtain a treasure inside and become the ruler of this universe. Chapter 1883. Yi Zichen finally understood why the White Messenger King had such a worried expression. The Master of the Milky Way was able to use the spear from a secret realm to become the #1 expert in countless galaxies. This naturally had a lot to do with his talent and hard work, but the spear was also a great help to him. The appearance of such a treasured land would definitely attract races from other galaxies. They would enter the secret realm in search of good fortune. The secret realms were connected, which meant that the races that entered would very likely come to the Milky Way galaxy, forged by the Master of the Milky Way. If the races that came were friendly, and if the ones that came were from the Sanyue galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy would face a calamity. How is it? Do you regret knowing all this? On the bed, the God Emperor narrowed his eyes into a line. Naturally, he saw the expressions and changes in the expressions of the epic experts in the room. Anyone could sense the heavy atmosphere in the room when he said those words. Regret? To be honest, no one dared to say they didn't. They knew that races from other galaxies could enter the Milky Way galaxy through a secret realm. In other words, from now on, they would have to live a life of fear and trepidation, never to end their days. They would have to constantly worry about the influx of races from beyond the Milky Way galaxy and worry about the consequences. That's why I said I hate trouble. Even before the God Emperor told him the truth, Yi Zichen had warned himself not to panic too much. However, the moment he said it, the heaviness in his heart spread throughout his body. Can I pretend I don't know anything? If I can, I'll take my people and leave right now. Area Yuan is pretty busy, and there's a bunch of things waiting for me to deal with, said Yi Zichen. Do you think that's possible? The God Emperor asked, then smiled at Yi Zichen. In truth, even if the Angel King hadn't called him over, the God Emperor was prepared to tell him everything after he woke up. Yi Zichen. In the eyes of both the God Emperor and Elder Lin, Yi Zichen was the only possibility within the Milky Way galaxy. In the future, he would have to stand beside the master of the Milky Way and face the existences from other galaxies, as well as the enemies from beyond. What the God Emperor didn't expect was that everything would happen so quickly. Although he could not go to the side of the Milky Way master now, in the near future, he would come into contact with the races outside the Milky Way galaxy. From the Emperor's smile, one could tell that it was impossible. Not long ago, he was trapped in a big pit by them. Fortunately, the pit was relatively far away from him, so he could still live his life comfortably. All right, then. In less than half a month, an even bigger pit appeared, and he even jumped into it himself. He really doubted what his brain was thinking just now. Why was his curiosity so strong? Yi Zichen smiled wryly and sighed. As he sighed, the God Emperor knew that Yi Zichen had accepted his fate. Little did they know, it was just as the God Emperor thought. Yi Zichen had indeed compromised. The planet he dreamed of returning to was in an era, and the era was in the Milky Way. If there was a problem with the Milky Way galaxy, the era would also have a problem, and the planet he lived on would not have a good ending. When the nest is overturned, no eggs remain intact. Yi Zichen understood this very well. When faced with the threat that the Milky Way galaxy was about to face, he would not shirk his duty. You and Elder Lin can trick me. Fine, I'll admit defeat. Right now, I'm in an era. Keep an eye on my people and make sure they get stronger as quickly as possible so that when the Milky Way galaxy is attacked, they can contribute a bit of their strength. Yi Zichen's scalp was numb. He didn't know what to say to Yume and the others. Not long ago, he just told them that their current efforts were for the sake of the future era's survival against Yale and the others. Now he had to go back and tell them that the mission objective had been upgraded. In the future, they'd have to face races beyond the Milky Way galaxy, and that their mission was to protect the universe. Bullshit? When they heard this, they'd be completely dumbfounded. No! To his surprise, the God Emperor rejected Yi Zichen's idea. Yi Zichen couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Why was the God Emperor rejecting him? Did he think that the people of an era were too weak? Even if he gave them time, they wouldn't be able to contribute their strength to the Milky Way galaxy? Wasn't that a bit looking down on them? Although our era's overall strength isn't enough, we're all absolutely hot-blooded and righteous people, said Yi Zichen. That's not what I meant. The God Emperor waved his hand. It's only natural for them to increase their strength as quickly as possible. Before long, I'll also help my clansmen increase their cultivation levels as quickly as possible. But you can't leave. Are you afraid I'll run? Yi Zichen raised his eyebrows. That's what I was thinking. The God Emperor laughed heartily. The God Emperor laughed heartily. Who knows if you will forget about the universe's secret realm the moment you return to the epic. But that's not the main reason. Not only can you not return, but the people around you can't either. If possible, it's best if you gather all the people on your side. Those with similar strength to them. Find me. What do you mean? Yi Zichen didn't understand. Bringing all of the era's experts to the God Realm would inevitably weaken the era's defenses. If Yale and the others attacked the era now, the consequences would be dire. Star-Lord Yi, you should know that if other races discover the Milky Way galaxy and enter, we'll be forced into a passive position, said the God Emperor solemnly. The God Emperor's gaze was solemn. The overall strength of the Milky Way galaxy is definitely behind the other galaxies in the universe. When they entered the Milky Way galaxy, they discovered if they enter the Milky Way galaxy and discover its hidden resources, they'll definitely plunder the Milky Way galaxy. That was right. Both Yi Zichen and Gu Xuanda understood this. A man's wealth was his own ruin. When what you possess is not equal to your own strength, those who are above you will naturally plunder what you possess. But what could they do if they didn't come in? Could they, at that moment, the God Emperor's eyes flashed with a sharp light. That's why I'm prepared to take the initiative. Our people will occupy the Milky Way galaxy's passageway ahead of time. Then we'll use our fiercest methods to force them back. Take the initiative to attack. This kind of retreat, in order to advance, was a way to avoid disaster for the current Milky Way galaxy. However, the problem was that they weren't strong enough. There's still plenty of good fortune in the secret realm. We can use it to strengthen ourselves and ensure that the passageway isn't discovered by other races. Star-Lordy, what do you think? Me? Chapter 1884. Danger lurked in every corner of the secret realm. Whether it was the danger of the secret realm itself or the possibility of races from other galaxies appearing within, rationality warned Yi Zichen not to make an impulsive decision. Rationality wasn't wrong, but sometimes rationality was the biggest stumbling block. Push yourself to the edge of death. The God Emperor had already said that the Milky Way galaxy's overall strength was inferior to that of the other galaxies. If other races entered the Milky Way galaxy, plundering resources was the best option. Destroy, destroy. The God Emperor hadn't said anything about this hidden threat, but everyone understood. Take the initiative to face the enemy and use battle to fuel battle. Explore the secret realm, obtain good fortune, strengthen oneself, and prevent other races from entering the Milky Way galaxy through the secret realm. It seemed dangerous and crazy, but it was definitely worth a try. When he heard Yi Zichen's reply, the God Emperor and Yi Zichen looked at each other and laughed. They both saw what they wanted to see in each other's eyes. Their gazes met, and they both understood that they were on the same side. It's just that, God Emperor. Yi Zichen's laughter didn't last for long. That's true, but there are still some things I need to ask you before I can make a decision. Speak. Your wounds. Yi Zichen pointed at the God Emperor's still unhealed wounds, his gaze solemn. I want to participate, and I'm willing to contribute my meager strength to the Milky Way galaxy. But you're already so badly injured in the secret realm. I'm just a half-assed transcendence cultivator. I'm afraid I'll lose my life if I go. And the people around me, I agree with your crazy decision, but we must also consider their safety. For our safety, Star-Lordy, Qing Li, Gu Xuanda, and the others were visibly moved. In truth, from the moment they decided to follow Yi Zichen to the new era, they'd handed the decision over to him. He hadn't acted arbitrarily. Now that Yi Zichen was actually thinking about them first, they couldn't help but feel warm inside. Yi Zichen smiled at Qing Li and the others, then looked back at the God Emperor and waited for his reply. Star-Lordy truly understands his subordinates, said the God Emperor. They are my subordinates. Not long ago, they were my seniors and seniors, said Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen refused to acknowledge that he was the God Emperor's subordinate. Even now, I'm just lucky to have crossed that chasm in cultivation. Please don't avoid the important and dwell on the trivial, Your Majesty. Your reply. Was your injury caused by the universe's secret realm, or was it caused by encountering other races in the secret realm and fighting with them? This is very important. This time, even the Angel King stopped pacing and stared at the Emperor on the bed. The Divine Emperor's reply was very important to them. If even a God Emperor ended up in such dire straits, never mind Gu Xuanda and the others, even Yi Zichen would die if he went in. If the Divine Emperor ran into other races, they needed to consider whether the other races had left any imprints on the God Emperor's body. Was the Milky Way galaxy safe now? Would other races come to the Milky Way galaxy through the passage? Neither. Suddenly, the Divine Emperor gave an answer that everyone found hard to believe. How is this possible? The God Emperor's injuries were not fake. The Angel King could prove this. When the God Emperor had just returned, he had been severely injured. Even now, his injuries were still severe. Everyone in the room could see it. He had also returned from a universe secret realm, but the source of his injuries wasn't from the universe secret realm, nor was it from any other race. Then how did his injuries come about? Could it be that he had sneezed, tripped over his right foot, and accidentally tripped in the void? Did he just happen to land on a hedgehog-like floating object and leave countless holes in his body? God Emperor, That's no fun. Yi Zichen shook his head. He thought the God Emperor was deliberately hiding something. What is it? I'm telling the truth, said the God Emperor. The universe's secret realm is indeed dangerous, but the truly dangerous places are the ones with the most precious treasures. Just now, I said that opportunity and danger coexist. I didn't go in search of treasures, so I naturally didn't encounter anything particularly dangerous. I didn't go in search of treasures. But your injuries are right there for all to see. Yi Zichen raised his voice. He really didn't get it. At a time like this, there was no point in hiding anything. The God Emperor wanted to pull him on board, but he didn't want to tell him everything. What was going on? Everyone could sense Yi Zichen's fury. The Angel King patted him on the shoulder in an attempt to calm him down. When the God Emperor saw the fury in Yi Zichen's eyes, he arched his brows and smiled. Do I have to be injured in a universe secret realm? Then tell me, who in the Milky Way can hurt you? There's no need for you to bring him here. I'll go see for myself, said Yi Zichen. Right now, no one in the Milky Way can hurt me. Look, Yi Zichen was so angry he wanted to laugh. He shrugged and nodded repeatedly. If the God Emperor has no intention of cooperating, then I don't think there's any need for us to continue this conversation, said the God Emperor, who was leaning against the headboard, calmly. Faced with Yi Zichen's fury, the God Emperor leaned against the headboard and said unhurriedly, this injury was actually left behind when the Lord of Blue Moon attacked the Milky Way. I've been using my power to suppress it, but it still comes back every 100 years. I've always used my strength to suppress it, but it still comes back every 100 years. The previous injuries were relatively minor. This time, it's just more serious. The God Emperor looked into Yi Zichen's eyes and chuckled. In truth, you could say it was caused by the universe's secret realm. Back then, in order to suppress my old injuries, I didn't even have a tenth of my strength left. Coincidentally, a rock from the outside floated into the universe's secret realm. The turbulence of a universe's secret realm almost caused me to get lost. This injury was left behind while I was trying to escape. Of course. No wonder I felt like the power inside you had existed for a long time, said the Angel King. It was the Angel King's words that indirectly proved the authenticity of the Emperor's words. I can assure you that the universe's secret realm is very dangerous. But so long as you don't touch the most precious treasures, even half-step transcendent or over-gods should be able to deal with them. That's why I asked you to send more experts over. With me here, I won't let them go either. So long as I'm here, I won't let them fall into danger. Chapter 1885. Following the alliance between the gods and the First Era, the Divine Palace dropped yet another bombshell. A secret realm connected to thousands of galaxies had appeared 15,000 kilometers outside the God realm. Unlike before, news of the secret realm's existence hadn't been announced to the world. Instead, it only circulated among the higher-ups of the God realm. Only over-gods and above were privy to this information. Everyone was at a loss when they heard the unfamiliar term secret realm. Whether it was a secret realm with precious treasures or other galaxies outside of the Milky Way galaxy, they were all shocking news to them. Elder Lin, I'll leave this trip to you. The God Emperor's aura was weak as he looked at the old man beside him. News of the secret realm had naturally alarmed the King of the Laws. He brought several Lords of the Laws with him to the outside, including Lin Ru, whom Yi Zichen was familiar with. When he'd heard about the secret realm, Elder Lin was utterly shocked. He'd never have guessed that the Milky Way galaxy, forged by the Milky Way God himself, would receive the universe's approval and open the door to the secret realm within. To him, the secret realm's appearance put enormous pressure on him. After hearing the God Emperor's decision, Elder Lin mulled it over for a moment before agreeing. Given the current situation, they couldn't just sit around and wait for death. Taking the initiative to prevent the other universes from directly entering the Milky Way galaxy might be the best solution for them. Leave it to me. Elder Lin's forceful voice reverberated throughout the room. It had been nearly a week since the God Emperor returned from the secret realm. Even so, the Divine Emperor's injuries showed no signs of recovery. His face was always pale, and when he spoke, his voice was weak and listless. His eyes were dark, his cheekbones were protruding, and his muscular body was nowhere near as muscular as before. During this time, the Angel King had been by his side the entire time. He understood the God Emperor's condition better than anyone else. That terrifying darkness energy was still wreaking havoc in the God Emperor's body. Elder Lin glanced at the God Emperor on the bed, his eyes filled with even greater regret. In the entire Milky Way galaxy, he understood the God Emperor the most. He naturally knew the God Emperor's injuries better than anyone else. Elder Lin patted the Divine Emperor's shoulder lightly and did not remind him to take care of his rest, which was of no importance. After I leave, you must keep a close eye on the news, no matter if it's to the other planes or... Elder Lin's voice suddenly stopped, and he shot the Divine Emperor a meaningful glance. They had been partners for billions of years, so there was no need for words to be said. The Divine Emperor instantly understood what Elder Lin wanted to express. Don't worry. Those little fellows don't have the ability to shake this Emperor's position. Anyway, just be careful. Before coming here, I made a trip to the God of Destruction Palace and completely sealed Yale's divine sense C without him knowing. Elder Lin said, "Sorry to trouble you." The Emperor smiled with a pale face. Then, he lay down on the bed and waved his hand. "This Emperor is a little tired. All of you should hurry up and leave. This Emperor is here with the God race. You can rest assured." With that, the Emperor God closed his eyes and no longer looked at anyone in the room. The Angel King and Elder Lin looked at him, then at each other. After nodding slightly, the Angel King took half a step back and made an inviting gesture. Elder Lin left the room with the Angel Monarch following closely behind. However, not long after they left, the Emperor God opened his eyes again, lifted his blanket, and looked at his leg. No one knew that his right leg was currently covered in black mist, and most of the skin and flesh on his leg had been completely corroded. Just from the visual impact, one could tell what kind of pain the Emperor God was enduring. However, he had a faint smile on his face, as if he didn't take all of this to heart. After a few more glances, he covered himself with the blanket again and snorted disdainfully. "That's all you've got? This Emperor thought you could directly take my life." When Elder Lin and the rest left the God Palace, many people had already gathered outside. These people were all experts above the Lord God level. Some of them held positions in the God Palace of the 4 God races, while others were elites from the major clans. All of them came here voluntarily. This time, the Emperor God didn't force them to go. The God race also needed people to defend. The other planes had been eyeing the God race covetously. If they sent out all their elites, the other planes might take this opportunity to attack the God race. Ruler of the laws. The experts cupped their fists at Elder Lin, then nodded at the newcomers. Their eyes flashed, and their thoughts raced. There were many people here, but they were absolutely trustworthy. If nothing out of the ordinary happened, everyone here was most likely curious about the secret realm. Of course, that didn't rule out the possibility that some people with ulterior motives had come with them to pass on information to the God race. Just now, Elder Lin had used their gazes and their series of actions to understand their thoughts. Is that all? No, Ji Yuan, Yi Zichen, and the others haven't arrived yet. Lin Ru blinked and looked around, but didn't see Yi Zichen anywhere. At the mention of Yi Zichen, she clenched her fists. She'd been in the First Era for so long. Yi Zichen hadn't even glanced at her. No matter what, they were good friends. She disregarded everything to stand by his side countless times, especially back in the immortal, demon, and demon realms. She'd been locked up. This guy had stayed in Chaos City ever since returning to the First Era. He hadn't even brought her any good news. "Is Ji Yuan coming with us as well?" asked someone from the Divine Palace of Liberty. Their grudge against Ji Yuan was undoubtedly the deepest. When they heard Yi Zichen was coming with them, they naturally weren't in a good mood. "Is there a problem?" Elder Lin glanced at him. "Ji Yuan is now the God race's ally. Furthermore, he's not weak. We'll need their strength on this trip. I urge you to behave yourselves when we get there. Don't try anything funny. If I find out, I won't treat you like the God Emperor. You're too forgiving." The Divine Palace of Liberty's over-god shut his mouth. As soon as they brought up Ji Yuan, Yi Zichen and his experts hurried to the divine palace of destruction. Yang Jian and the great sage were naturally among them, but the god of destruction's war goddess and rhythm god were also with them. Elder Lin. Yi Zichen walked up to Elder Lin and nodded. Elder Lin met his gaze and nodded back, then turned to the other overgods. Let's go.